It goes against everything you believe in, but you do believe in love again.
Fuck you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and welcome to the 39th episode of Good Timin. As always in this podcast, we're going to be talking all about one of our favorite bands, the Beach Boys. And I'm really looking forward to today's show because we're going to be doing our fourth member spotlight episode, which is where we focus in on a specific member of the band and discuss their life and musical career. In the first three episodes of this series, we covered Al Jardine, Carl Wilson, and Mike Love, who, of course, were all founding members of the band. However, today we're going to be talking about a member who joined the Beach Boys a bit later on, but yet has still contributed a lot to the group over the years, both in the studio and on stage. Of course, the person who I'm talking about is Bruce Johnston, who first joined the band in April 1965 to fill in for Brian Wilson on stage. But shortly after this, he became an official member of the group and has gone on to contribute to virtually every Beach Boys album since then. While many big fans of the band, like ourselves, may know Bruce for his songwriting and vocal contributions to the group throughout the 60s and 70s, what some may not realize is that he has actually had a very long and accomplished career in music outside of the Beach Boys as a songwriter, producer, and performer. So today we're going to be discussing Bruce's musical career as a whole, as well as giving a general overview of his life. Joining me for today's episode, I have my fellow ocean lovers, Riley, Matt, and Nate. So as always, I'm happy to have you guys here, and I'm excited to talk about Riley's favorite Beach Boy with you all. Before we dive into Bruce's early years, do you guys have any quick general thoughts or things that you wanted to say about Bruce and his role in the Beach Boys?
I definitely have a couple of thoughts about Bruce and his role in the Beach Boys. First things first, while I make fun of him a lot, I do really like Bruce. I think beyond just as a musician, he's just a genuinely nice guy who's always been just a very kind person to fans and people in the studio alike. He's always been on Brian's side through thick and thin, and I've always appreciated that. Although I kind of always have found it a little bit hard to consider him like one of the Beach Boys, I've definitely found him to be a Beach Boy, in a similar vein to Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin. And I think unlike Ricky Fataar and I guess actually similarly to Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin, I kind of think this because he's had such a bigger role outside of the band as well, where it's kind of like saying, that's another like band I can think of, like someone like the lesser
Like
members
Pat
of.
Smear's relation to Nirvana.
Sure. I'm not a big Nirvana fan, but sure. Um, where it's like, yeah, they're a part of the band, but they're not like in the core of the band. But Bruce has done so much outside of the Beach Boys that I've always kind of found to be, what's the word, like I kind of admire that a lot. He's worked with my favorite band, Pink Floyd. Um, Even though it was for like a song and a half, you could his contributions make those songs as there's work as a tape editor and an engineer and an arranger, and especially as a producer and a songwriter for other artists, I've always admired. And I kind of wish he had a bigger solo career than the shit we got in 1977 with Going Public, because his stuff in the 60s was honestly pretty incredible. And I kind of wish we got a couple of more of those songs with the Beach Boys, because despite me shitting on Endless Harmony all the time, the other songs he's contributed are pretty damn good, and I wish we got a little bit more of that. But I want to set the record straight. I don't hate him. I just think he's corny and he's very easy to make fun of. He's kind of like your friend that's like, he's a little weird, but he's still your friend. So you love him.
Well, all that was well put in your own unique way of looking at things. And I did actually appreciate all that. And I would just add the biggest thing that I really respect about Bruce is that he's the ultimate professional within the music industry. And there's a lot of people that get really far in music off of pure artistry or pure passion, but they might be nightmares to work with. And whereas Bruce, I think, had to really hone his skills and work really hard and make a prosperous network. And I think he was just a great chameleon in the studio. I think he could work with the Raiders or the Mamas and the Papas or Jane and Dean or the Beach Boys, Pink Floyd, Elton John, whoever. And instead of making it all about himself, he would serve the song and serve the artist. And he's had such a prolific career, but so many people don't know about quite how prolific it was. And that's just because of how selflessly he worked. And I think that's just so commendable and so respectable in an industry full of prima donnas and egomaniacs. To just be a normal, hardworking guy is so commendable.
I just want to say I kind of agree with everything that's been said. One thing that I really want to give him a shout out for is the fact that Bruce, I know, was very, very good friends with Dennis. And Bruce was like kind of one of the first ones that kind of showed Dennis how to play piano and really encouraged Dennis to pursue music on a deeper level in terms of like songwriting and production, to the point that Dennis, in the liner notes of Pacific Ocean Blue, wrote, "God bless you, Bruce." So that's something that I'll always appreciate about Bruce. It's just that I feel like he kind of believed in Dennis when maybe some other members of the band really didn't. And Pacific Ocean Blue is an awesome record. It's one of my favorites. And some of Dennis's songs are some of my favorites in the catalog. So that's one thing I'll always really appreciate about Bruce, that he encouraged Dennis to do that.
Pretty much everything that you guys said. Another thing too, Bruce has always been like so commendable of Brian, like always complimented, how great of a record he thought Pet Sounds was. Obviously, he was the one that kind of introduced it to Paul and John in England, which is really cool. But yeah, Bruce has written some of my favorite songs in the Beach Boys catalog. Really just, yeah, like you guys said, a true professional, and seems like a really great person as well. So I'm looking forward to discussing him tonight. So
many bands would be so lucky to have a member like Bruce, like who is a industry person first and foremost, and like Riley mentioned, had been a tape editor and an arranger and an intern, and truly climbed the ladder and knows the industry inside and out. I think that is largely what has allowed the Beach Boys to continue until today, is having someone in the group that has just such a vast knowledge of the industry, even if they're not making the decisions, just to be someone to, yeah, that sounds good. Nah, maybe don't do this. Yeah, maybe do this. Maybe we should work with this. But like when you really get into the nitty gritty details of a lot of the Beach Boys 70s, 80s, and 90s story, Bruce was really integral in making things happen.
All right, so to kick us off, Nate, do you want to talk a bit about Bruce's early years and how he first got into the music industry?
Yeah, so Bruce is originally from Illinois, and he was adopted, but most of that familial story is not very public, so we won't get too much into that. But he moved to California as a young guy, and during the summers, he was fortunate enough to attend a summer camp that's actually not too far from me, called Interlochen in Michigan, I believe. And they're really world renowned as one of the best places a young person can go to learn music. So, of course, Bruce was going there and playing piano and learning how to play piano. But when he talks about his time there, it seems like the piano aspect was only one piece of the pie of what made that such a rewarding experience for him. He said he would listen to the orchestras tune up and he would watch the orchestras perform, and just being surrounded by so many, young and hungry musicians sort of gave him that competitive spirit, like how can you make yourself stand out amongst just being a small fish in a big pond, so to speak. So I think all of that was really impactful. So you get to his teenage years going to high school in Southern California, and he's hanging out with the likes of Phil Spector and Sandy Nelson and Jan Berry, and the list goes on of people that would ultimately become celebrities that Bruce was playing music with and going to school with. But this was before they were all celebrities. So Bruce's first band was Phil Spector on the electric guitar, Sandy Nelson on the drums, and Bruce on keyboards. And they were called, I believe, the Sleepwalkers. And they would do, any gig across the Southern California area. They'd play sock hops. They would be a studio band for other acts. Whenever a band was needed, they would volunteer themselves. And all three of those guys obviously went on to become legends. And on Bruce's, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the story, but maybe our audience isn't. On Bruce's first day in the industry, he was going to work a very entry level type position at Donna Records. And on Bruce's literal first day on the job, he's sitting in the office with Sandy Nelson and people in their friend group. An angry artist walks into the office of the studio owner. They start arguing back and forth, and the artist, who's obviously upset and most likely about not getting paid or something along those lines, shoots the studio owner, blood everywhere, terrible crime scene. And this is Bruce's day one in the industry. And this was during the year 1957, which a lot of Beach Boys fans think holds significance as the reason why Bruce would eventually include that year in the title of Disney Girls, which is about, the loss of innocence. So I know that's a lot to pack into a few sentences there, but basically to sum it all up was Bruce had a lot of talent, but he also had amazing connections and a competitive spirit that really set him apart. And unfortunately, I think that incident where he witnessed the murder caused him to have to grow up in an instant. And, that can be really hard for a kid. But the flip side of that is, given that in essence, Bruce had to grow up so quickly, he basically just started working as a professional in the industry, overnight, and started taking very adult jobs and conducting orchestras and arranging for singers. And so he was just off to the races extremely quickly at a time when it wasn't even that common for people so young to be working in the industry, but he had such a thorough background that he was ready for it.
Do you want to get into some of Bruce's earliest recordings or some of his earliest collaborations working with other artists like Phil Spector?
Yeah, so I'm just going to pull up our list that we were working on, but some that really stand out that I think most people would know, or that at least a lot of our listeners would probably be familiar with, would be the first ever, or what's often called the first ever surf record, Moondog by the Gamblers. Bruce played piano on, and as he says, co-wrote. But during these days, almost all the writing credits on songs were usually the group's managers or whoever managed to steal the publishing away from guys like Bruce, who actually were writing these songs, but they were so young that they didn't know anything about songwriters credits. So you had Bruce working on Moondog by the Gamblers. You had him working with Spector's first group called the Teddy Bears, doing his first studio group, Teddy Bears, on Don't You Worry My Little Pet. And he had another song that would go on to be a very iconic record of the era, and that was Teen Beat with Sandy Nelson, which he co-wrote with Sandy, and he arranged all the instruments. And so already just the first few songs he's contributed to on record were hugely impactful on the rock and roll genre.
A few of those early tracks I wanted to shout out myself. This is from Nate's list that he made us, his giant list of Bruce contributions. I thought that on This Is Paradise by The Rituals, he was listed as the arranger. I think that that's a really cool recording, a really cool kind of early instrumental. Gee, But I'm Lonesome by the Playgirls. Bruce is credited as songwriter. I thought that that was a pretty solid early track from him, considering how young he was at the time. And then the track Let No One Tell You by Ron Holden, which is from 1960. I believe Bruce wrote that and arranged it. And I thought that was a really cool track as well. So those are just a few that I wanted to shout out.
Yeah, those are the two that really stuck with me too. They're very evocative, moving tracks. The But I'm Lonesome and Love You So.
I've known G, But I'm Lonesome for quite a bit, but I didn't know it was by Bruce, which is probably the funny thing.
Wow.
I knew the version by Lee Andrews. I think I was just like cycling through a bunch of like doo-wop playlists, early late 50s like vocal groups, early 60s vocal groups, and that song came up and I really enjoyed it. And even today I texted Jake, I'm like, Bruce didn't write this.
Yeah.
And then I actually look at, because the songwriting credits on Spotify had it wrong. It was probably like some producer or whatever, manager, like you said. And then I keep looking and I find like the actual like single that came out by Lee Andrews. Um, and under the song, what do you know, is B. Johnston. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Bruce did write this. And I think it's funny that this song was recorded by a couple of other artists, because it's kind of became like a minor like industry standard song, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
You have a lot of those, like In the Still of the Night, it's kind of like probably one of the biggest ones, like plenty of other groups covering it. But
Yeah, I always joke that, I mean, even like we're only 2 or 3 years into his career and we're already rattling off all these names like Spector and Sandy Nelson and Ron Holden. And I always joke that Bruce was like practically omnipresent in the music industry to be constantly working with all these different people seemingly at once.
So kind of moving forward with Bruce's musical career, one of the first songs that really jumped out at me are Do the Surfer Stomp, which is credited just to Bruce Johnston. Do you want to talk a little bit about that song, Nate, and or how that song kind of came together?
Yeah, so from what I know, this was the era in which you had groups, I mean, really following Moondog which was more or less the first surf song. You had all these groups popping up like the Deltones and the Ventures, and from one single, this genre blossomed into a whole scene, and they were making surf movies. And I think, Bruce was an avid surfer as well, so I think he just wanted a piece of the pie, and didn't reinvent the wheel, but made a really smoking, rock and surf song that was a huge local hit. I don't think it really did anything on any sort of national charts, but it made him almost like a household name overnight in that local LA surf scene.
I also really like the B side of that. I believe it was the B side. Is it Ramrod?
Yeah, that was from an album that came out shortly after that song became a hit. They had did an album called Bruce Johnston and his surfing band Pajama Party at UCLA, something along those lines. And it's just crazy to think about. The Beach Boys weren't even, they either weren't a group yet or had just started. And you already have, Bruce releasing these surf albums. And it's so early in the surf music genre that it's obviously still a lot of like R&B standards and things like that. But yeah, Ramrod is really like, you could hear that on like Surfing USA or an early Beach Boys album. It's got great surf energy. And the cool thing about Bruce's surf music is he was a keyboard player, and most surf music is pretty lacking in the keyboard department. But since that was his main instrument, there's a lot of cool like Wurlitzer key stuff going on his surf songs that he did.
Yeah, I think you added a couple of tracks from that Surfer Pajama Party album. And yeah, I noticed that it really has a lot of like high energy to the recording. So it's really entertaining to listen to. I believe it said it was recorded live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of really great, like you said, that really like early surf rock energy. So yeah, I really enjoyed listening to those tracks.
What I'd say is like straight up punky.
So around this time, Bruce forms, I believe, what's mostly got kind of a studio band, right, called the Rip Chords. Nate, do you kind of want to get into the Rip Chords and some of their material?
Yeah, so that came about really interestingly. It was around this time that Bruce got together with Terry Melcher, and Terry Melcher was actually the one that discovered the Rip Chords. They did a doo-wop single, kind of like a Jan and Dean ripoff, and it didn't do much, but it did well enough to convince the label to give them a full deal and to hook them up with the funds, where Terry brought on Bruce, and this was when the Beach Boys were becoming popular. So, in a way they were knocking off the Beach Boys sound, but one thing I forgot to mention too is that Bruce was jamming with Jan and Dean during their very earliest sessions. And, on the playlist that we'll attach to this when it's released, you can hear extremely early Jan and Dean, back when they were called the Barons, bootleg tapes of them jamming in the late 50s, doing that modern harmony doo-wop kind of stuff with Bruce there singing and playing piano. So the Rip Chords, it was like taking a little bit of that Beach Boys, Brian Wilson magic, a little bit of what he did with Jan and Dean, and then a little bit of what he did as like a solo surf artist, and sort of meshing all those past experiences into what would be, his first real claim to fame on the national stage.
Yeah, so the single from the Rip Chords, Hey Little Cobra, I believe goes like top 5 nationally or top 10. It's a really big single and kind of like Bruce's first taste of like massive success. Like you mentioned, Nate, it's clearly very like kind of Beach Boys inspired. They're clearly kind of going for that sound. But it is a pretty solid track. It's not something I'd like regularly revisit. I do want to say Terry Melcher's voice, I believe he sings the majority of this song.
Yep.
I think it is kind of an acquired taste. It definitely doesn't have like that like beauty to it that like the Beach Boys voices have. But that said, decent track. I also do like the song Gone, which I believe Bruce also wrote. That's also a Rip Chords track. I think that's a very solid track as well. That's one of the ones that I also noted as like a significant track that I really enjoyed quite a bit. So,
yeah, Gone is interesting because it's definitely representative of that like middle ground between doing like the late 50s doo-wop kind of material and doing like a straight up Beach Boys kind of song. It's like
Hmm.
right smack dab in the middle of those two lanes. But yeah, what I like about the Rip Chord stuff, I agree with you about Terry Melcher's voice for sure. And
Yeah.
about really all the Rip Chords voices except for Bruce, not exactly Beach Boys or Jane and Dean level. What I do think is great about their stuff is they really just let the Wrecking Crew guys go nuts with those backing tracks. And they
Yeah.
rock, like the tracks rock way harder than really any Beach Boys or Jane and Dean stuff. And they're distorted and crunchy and loud. And you can just really turn those up and really appreciate Hal Blaine's drumming and Glenn Campbell on the guitar and Carol Kay on the bass. So I do really love those albums just to hear how great the Wrecking Crew were too.
Yeah. I noticed that about quite a few of these early recordings from Bruce is that, yeah, like the drumming, especially. I know some of it's Hal Blaine and some of the other Wrecking Crew guys, but like the drumming is just super intense and kind of has that punk energy to it, which I really like a lot. So, do you guys, Matt and Riley, do you guys have any thoughts on any of the early Bruce, like Rip Chords material, any of that stuff?
Definitely that first album. I think it came out in 62,
Three.
63. Very much copying the Beach Boys and to an extent Jan and Dean. That being said, it is pretty good. I think in many ways it sounds honestly like a more refined version of like the Surfin' Safari album. Like, because that one is like,
Yeah.
and more so like actually Surfin' USA. Like, if you took like a lot of the aspects that made Surfin' USA like punky and like garagey, and you refined it and made it a much cleaner sound, that's probably what you got with the first Rip Chords album. But the second one I actually enjoy quite a bit. I really like Beach Girl. I think that
Yeah.
sounds very pretty, and
Yeah.
it's I don't want to say it's proto Pet Sounds, but I would say it's almost like proto Beach Boys today kind of sounding. Um, it's reminded me of Your Summer Dream, but like much more lush production on it, and kind of goes to show that Bruce was quite the producer himself and quite the arranger.
The first time I heard Beach Girl, it like knocked my socks off. And I was
Yeah,
like,
you
where has
showed it to
this
me. It
song
knocked
been all
my
my life?
socks off. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
right.
was incredible.
That was the one that I really was gonna point out too. Yeah, Beach Girl. It's a very pretty song. I was like, when I first heard it, I was like, damn, I wasn't expecting that, but it's pretty damn good.
Yeah. That was one of the main Rip Chords tracks I wanted to shout out as well, Beach Girl, which I think Bruce pretty much did a lot of the work on that. I think he wrote it and produced and arranged it. So, also the track Hot Rod USA by the Rip Chords I thought was pretty
Yeah, that's
solid.
a really
Well,
fun one.
yeah, really fun track. Again, very Beach Boys inspired, but there's a few cool little parts of it that I really like that I think make it distinctive. So, I thought that was a pretty solid song. Also Three Window Coupe I enjoyed quite a bit as well. So.
They're supposed to have Pat Boone did a version of Beach Girl. I don't know if I want to listen to that.
I can't.
Yes, it was just an album cut for the Rip Chords, but everyone in the industry like knew that that song was going to be a big hit. So there was like apparently like some behind the scenes like different artists were trying to like get their hands on it to record it as a single first, and Pat Boone got to it first after the Rip Chords and had a big hit with it.
I love the way I love the harmonic stack of Bruce and Terry. They sound beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Terry kind of has a little bit of like a raspier, less like smooth voice, and the way that mixes with Bruce is a bit corny, but still a bit like smooth voice.
Yeah.
It has such a great sound. They have such a great blend.
that blend would reappear a lot on like Beach Boys 85 and Still Cruising and Kokomo and stuff when Terry was back in the fold because he was singing on those tracks too, and they do have a really special blend. A lot of the Ripcord stuff is just Bruce and Terry like quadruple tracked.
Before we move on to some more of the Bruce and Terry stuff, I did want to mention real quick the album "Surfing Around the World," which was Bruce's, I guess, his like first solo album. Nate, do you want to talk a little bit about that album, "Surfing Around the World" from 1963?
This album from 1963 is downright heavy. Like people talk about Helter Skelter inventing metal. I challenge them to check out Jersey Channel Islands Part 7. That
Oh,
fuzz
yeah.
bass is just ripping. Like the some of the guitar and bass tones on Surfing Around the World would not sound out of place on like a modern alternative rock album. Like it actually really blows me away. Especially, the other week we were talking about Little Honda being like an early fuzz guitar song. And Bruce was doing stuff a few years earlier on this album that was far fuzzier. And, it just sort of gets not always mentioned in the history books. But I love this album. It's cool because you have, instead of like a Beach Boy kind of sound, you have Bruce doing the leads, but you have the Phil Spector's Girls, the Blossoms doing the backgrounds. And so it definitely sounds very early 60s. But then again, I really love a lot of the surf instrumentals. And I think even Bruce would say like this album was him sort of growing and finding his voice, and is, not a masterpiece, but it sure rocks.
Yeah. Like even though like the melodies might be kind of like pretty standard, like the energy of like the instrumentation and the playing is just like so great on this album. Yeah, I specifically wanted to mention that track as well. Jersey Channel Islands Part 7. Like holy crap does that rock. Like you said, like that really fuzzy tone to it. Such high energy. I also really like the title track, Surfing Around the World. There's a really pretty instrumental called, I think it's Makaha at Midnight. Which I
That
think
one
is
has
really,
some Beach Boys Today vibes for sure
yeah, for
too.
sure. Yeah, that's a really pretty instrumental. Definitely one that I'm going to be coming back to. And then also the song Down Under, which I believe Bruce wrote as well. I think is a really cool track as well. So yeah, that album, even though like some people like you might look at the cover and just think like, oh, this is like your standard kind of like early surf rock album. There's definitely some tracks in here that really jumped out at me, mostly because the instrumentation and the arrangements, really high energy for sure. So.
Dude, Jersey Channel Island part. Where's the first six parts? I want to hear them.
Yeah.
Dude, to think that when I first heard it, I was like, this is not Bruce Johnston. Like, what the fuck happened to him? How did he go from this to Endless
Happy
Journey?
endings.
Like, blew my mind. Um,
Yeah.
Down Under also has a writing credit from Hal Blaine, which I think was pretty cool.
Right, yeah.
Great song. I knew Makaha Midnight. I think Nate, you might have shown that to me when I came to Wisconsin. Uh,
Yeah.
I love that one. That's such a beautiful instrumental. I actually played it on my radio show, believe it or not.
That
Um,
guitar tone is like so haunting. I don't know if they use like a volume pedal or just fiddling the knob or a slide, but whatever it is,
I
it
couldn't
sounds
tell you, but I love
really
the use of
gorgeous.
fuzz. The use of fuzz in 1963 on Jersey Channel Island Part 7 is they used it on more than one instrument from what I can tell, because you have like it's probably on bass is what they used the fuzz on. And for like the main like rhythm part, and then you have that lead guitar probably played on like a Jaguar or something with a very sharp tone with a little bit of the fuzz, but so much reverb on it. It knocked my socks off. I had no idea where that came from with Bruce, but I loved it.
Matt, any thoughts on any of the material from the Surfing Around the World album that you had the chance to listen to?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a solid listen. Definitely kind of like Riley said, not really what you'd expect from Bruce Johnston. You know, you think something maybe a little bit more
Going public,
yeah, going public, like kind
going
of
in the
Yeah.
60s.
a little saccharine, but this was really good. This was really enjoyable. I don't really have any thoughts on the top of my head because I just listened to it a little while ago, but yeah, no, definitely kind of what I wasn't expecting from Bruce.
Yeah. It's the going private to his going public. So
Jesus
Uh,
Christ.
Yeah,
yeah,
when you look at his Beach Boy stuff, it's really easy to like typecast him as the couple of, Beach Boy songs that he contributed all have that sort of similar sweet, tender ballad kind of sound. But when you dive into his, production career and his solo career, it's extremely eclectic.
before we move on to some of the Bruce and Terry stuff, two other tracks I wanted to shout out. I believe these are both kind of like studio group type tracks as well. Bruce is part of a group called the Hot Doggers, which I think is an interesting name
That's
for
a
a group.
very Bruce name.
The Hot Doggers. But two things I wanted to shout out from them. They're both covers, I believe. The first is Surfin', which is obviously the Beach Boys song, but they kind of give it more of like updated sound, less of kind of like that like folky arrangement of the original, where it's like very soft and very primitive. And they give it some more energy, which I really like. I actually would say I prefer this version to the Beach Boys version.
And Bruce on lead vocal, so it's like an alternate universe.
Yeah,
Hearing
right,
Bruce do the
right.
lead
Yeah,
on Surfing USA and Surfing.
yeah. And then I also wanted to shout out their cover of Walk Don't Run, which I believe is a Ventures track. I think that they actually do a really great job with that. It's honestly even more high energy than the Ventures version, and I might even prefer it for that reason. So I think that they do a great job with that one as well. So
I don't think it was more high energy. It was just differently arranged. The guitar tones were a lot more trebly and
mm.
sharp compared to the Ventures one, which was a lot more round and soft, I guess. I prefer the
Uh,
Avengers one, but I think they did a good job. And Surfing, I agree. I think I prefer it to the original
yeah.
because it's a lot more refined. It sounds a lot more smooth and rightly produced.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
the Hot Doggers was the first time that Bruce and Terry worked together. It was like just them like testing out what they could do together. And this was actually like before the Rip Chords, but I think released possibly afterwards.
I can't
So
get over
yeah, it's
that.
just Bruce and Terry and the Wrecking Crew guys just kind of experimenting.
Hot dog.
So actually, my wife Sophie and I, we love Bruce so much that next time we go to a Beach Boys show, we're gonna get custom Hot Doggers shirts and try to see what Bruce thinks of the
You're
Hot
probably gonna
Doggers
get.
merch.
You've met Bruce a couple of times, so I wouldn't be shocked if you could just like walk up to me like, "Hey, Bruce, you recognize this?" And it just says hot
Yeah,
doggers.
yeah.
So speaking of Bruce and Terry, Nate, do you want to kind of get into the first kind of like the Bruce and Terry singles that they put out around 1964, and kind of like that whole partnership?
Yeah, so man, what I think is really cool about Bruce and Terry, about their projects was by this point they were both each working with a lot of different successful groups. This was about the time that Terry was starting to work with the Birds, and Bruce was starting to work. He was doing stuff with Dick Dale, and they, were doing the Rip Chords together. So they ultimately created this Bruce and Terry group to sort of be the place to experiment for what they were ultimately going to bring to the other groups that they were working with. And you can even hear this by the time that Bruce joins the Beach Boys. He's doing stuff like Girl, It's All Right Now and Don't Run Away. That definitely, it was Bruce and Terry, it was almost like this was their sketchbook to come up with different ideas. Bruce got to experiment, I mean, sorry, Terry got to experiment with the folk guitar, Birds kind of sound. Bruce got to experiment with the Beach Boy sound, and there's some kind of East Coast Phil Spector sounding songs. And so it just provided them both an opportunity to experiment a lot. And so it's really musically rich stuff. And their first go at it was Summer Means Fun, backed with Thank You Baby, which I'd say is like by all means like a perfect pop single. I think Summer Means Fun is a great rock and roll song, and Thank You Baby is a really gorgeous ballad.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting way to put it. It's just honestly kind of like you're like like a musician's a big side project while they like work on like other material. Um, like it kind of gives them a chance to creatively explore a lot of ideas, a lot of melodies, a lot of production things that they weren't really allowed to do with their kind of like main focus. Did he do Bruce and Terry stuff when he was with the Beach Boys, like when he started off?
Yeah, and that was part of the reason that he couldn't be an official Beach Boy for those first couple years that he was playing with them, is because he still had his Bruce and Terry deal with Columbia Records. And you could back then you couldn't really, even still today it would be hard to double dip like that and be signed to one label as one artist and signed to another label as another artist.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm particularly a big fan of Don't Run Away. I feel like
Mhm.
Jake's gonna mention that one too when he gets back. I mean, I don't want to say it's like almost like Pet Sounds, but it kind of is in terms of, especially with melody and focus. I mean, you look at a lot of the stuff that Terry Melcher was doing with the Birds, Mr. Tambourine Man, and like a lot of that. I mean, I love the Birds, and they're a lot more folky, but like they played around more with like the genre of like folk rock in general rather than like studio experimentation with melodies and like topics of songs. And then you look at Don't Run Away, and it's just like it does have a lot of that like how would I explain it? Like not teenage angst, but like teenage loss inside of it, which is a lot of what Pet Sounds is, which I think was pretty cool.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great song. And yeah, go back to what you were saying, Nate, with the Columbia Records thing. I believe that contract expired sometime in '67 or so, because I think the first time
Yep,
on an album was Wild Honey. He's on the back of Wild Honey.
exactly.
And yeah, like nowadays, I don't know, if you ever look at the liner notes of an album, any album, whenever they
Yep.
featuring, you'll see sometimes like it appears courtesy of blah 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 blah, which is usually like when they're signed to a different label and they're appearing on like a guest track or something.
Exactly.
I guess
And
this
that was
I guess this kind of predates all of that. In the '60s it was different.
right. And so, but yeah, I think Riley summed it up well too, that it was just like they had a really cool side project that they got to just be creatively fulfilled by, and they got paid a hell of a lot of money to do it, which is like a crazy cool combination. And the really cool thing that I'm glad I'm remembering to mention is that their single "Summer Means Fun" was the first pop or rock record ever recorded with an 8-track tape machine. And the way it came about was that Bruce and Terry were getting ready for a session at Sunset Sound, and they went into some closet or behind some curtain or into some small room on the side, something like that. And they noticed this big machine, and they couldn't quite tell what it was. And they asked the engineers at Sunset, they're like, "What is this?" And the engineers are like, "Oh, you guys wouldn't be interested, you guys wouldn't really care. It's a 8-track tape machine that Disney commissioned to record the orchestras and the voices for their musicals." And of course, Bruce had been editing tape for years, so he was obviously very well aware with, the possibilities there. And so they, begged the engineers to dust it off and let them use it. And so Summer Means Fun was the first pop record ever done on with 8 tracks of tape.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
I know Disney was one of the first that did a lot of overdubbing. Like if you watch Cinderella, when she sings Sing Sweet Nightingale, and it's like the bubbles, that was one of the earliest uses of overdubbing.
Right. So same studio and same tape machine.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so to give my thoughts real quick on some of the Bruce and Terry material, as Riley mentioned, I love "Don't Run Away." I think it's a gorgeous song. Like you guys kind of said, it has like that like angst, that longing, kind of like that melancholy that like a lot of like the mid-60s Beach Boys ballads have, like from Today and from Pet Sounds. And I just really love the arrangement. It's just a really beautiful track. I love Bruce's vocals on it as well. Also the songs "Thank You Baby," "Carmen," and "Girl, It's All Right Now," I also really enjoyed. I think that they're all really well arranged and produced, and I enjoy Bruce's vocals on them. Terry's voice is fine, but I would have preferred it if Bruce would have sang more of the leads on this material, because I think he would have fit it better. But that's just my opinion. So,
I think Carmen would have made one hell of a Crystals record.
all right, so now since we're kind of getting to the mid 60s now, this is around the time where Bruce starts to really like form a connection with the Beach Boys, and eventually joins the band. So Nate, do you kind of want to get into how Bruce officially becomes a Beach Boy?
Yeah, so I guess I'm assuming most of our fans know the story and have heard it a million times that, Brian was getting sick and couldn't tour anymore, and so they needed a replacement. And Mike called Bruce not to be the replacement, but to find the replacement. And Bruce allegedly asked, a dozen or so people, but I think we all know that deep down he really wanted to take that opportunity for himself. So nonetheless, he, volunteered himself for the role and had never really, outside of maybe once or twice, never touched a bass in his life. And here he was, about to become the bassist in one of the biggest bands in the world. So not only was he playing on stage, but very quickly, he's an integral part, I'd say really instantly, he's an integral part of the vocal blend. And the first song he sings on for the band is "California Girls." And I mean, what a way to start,
I wish they all could be.
That's exactly what I was. You took the words out of my mouth, Nate. What a way to start on one of their greatest songs,
Yeah, and he had so much, as we've been talking about, years of experience at this point. I think that was so much of why he could just hop right in. And, he had been practicing for this moment and preparing for this moment for years,
Mm-hmm. And his voice, it's like it's clear as a bell, and you can hear it as soon as it comes on, in the harmony stack. I think that maybe I would say it adds a bit of lightness and maybe sweetness that not that they didn't have that to begin with, but just like an extra oomph to it,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think really his voice it is very different than, like, how with the Beach Boys, especially their early stuff, like in a way, almost all their voices sound really similar in the 60s. And a lot of times you have to be like, wait, who's singing this? Who's singing this? But Bruce's voice actually sounds kind of quite different than the Wilsons' voices and Mike's voice. But I think it gave Brian a whole new instrument. And Brian made such an effective use of Bruce's voice on "California Girls" and "Little Girl I Once Knew" and "God Only Knows." It just gave him a beautiful timbre to work with. And Brian just very quickly picked up on how he could use Bruce's vocal timbre effectively.
Yeah. I also wanted to shout out on "Summer Days and Summer Nights." I love Bruce's Celesta playing on "Girl Don't Tell Me." Very, very tastefully done.
Yeah,
Also,
he has a lot of cool instrumental parts on that album.
Yeah, like you guys mentioned, yeah, his vocals on California Girls, like instantly recognizable. I think it's a good vocal part when like you can't imagine someone else singing that part, and that's kind of how I feel about it. Like to me, it's like that's Bruce's part. Like his voice is just so distinctive there, and I couldn't imagine it being sung by anybody else. I also want to shout out from the Summer Days and Summer Nights album, "Girl from New York City," which I believe Bruce does that real high like falsetto part
Yeah.
during the chorus. Really like that a lot, and it really already kind of shows Bruce's talent as a vocalist.
Yeah, he plays the upright piano on that song as well.
Nate, I want to ask, when Bruce came into the fold for the live act, did he take over Al's spot for Brian's parts, or did he kind of take over, or did he just kind of add the fifth member? Like,
Vocally, you're saying?
yeah, because I know Al would sing a lot of Brian's leads.
I think they, in a way similar to kind of how they did it for the rest of their time playing together, is I think they kind of just shared the parts very democratically. And I've also heard Bruce say before that while those original Beach Boys were still playing together, their voices would get so tired and sore sometimes that they would, on a night-to-night basis, be like, okay, Carl, it's your turn to sing the high part tonight. Okay, Bruce, it's your turn to sing the high part tonight. And they would they all knew the part so well that they could kind of cover for each other and switch off. But I think, you might have Bruce do I Get Around, but you might have Al do Papa Umamau, and just so on and so forth.
Yeah, isn't there a story too that like Carl asked him how much you want to get paid, and he said like
I love that.
it's $200 or something a week. He was thinking it was like a week, and it was like he was getting like $200 a night or something like that.
Yeah, and he gets this big old check. And there's one I love too where he joined, this was like a few weeks into him playing with the band. They're staying at this beautiful hotel. He puts on the Beach Boy striped shirt. He's feeling like the shit. He goes down to the pool at the hotel, and a lady at the pool goes, "Oh, you're a Beach Boy, right? You're a Beach Boy." And Bruce goes, "Well, yes, I am." And she goes, "Oh, fantastic. Can you get us two towels?"
As we move forward with Bruce's musical career, obviously in 1966, which is a big year for the Beach Boys, Brian puts out Pet Sounds. And of course, what's notable about that is not only does Bruce contribute vocals to a lot of the tracks on Pet Sounds, but he also is the one who introduces the album to Paul McCartney and John Lennon. And they both really love it. They're blown away by it. Bruce has done interviews where he talks about like this encounter with them and kind of like, spending the day with them and basically like, listening to their fascination with the music, which is really cool. So I'm thankful that we have that perspective from Bruce. And I've heard him tell that story before, but yeah, Bruce contributed backing vocals to some of the most notable tracks on the album, like Wouldn't It Be Nice? That's Not Me, God Only Knows, where Bruce's part is like, again, like California Girls, instantly recognizable. Like, it's Bruce. And again, I think it just really shows Brian really effectively using the guys' vocals in the right places, like again, kind of like what I said with California Girls. I can't imagine anyone else singing that part on God Only Knows than Bruce. So I think it's a really great use of the voice. And yeah, do you guys have any thoughts on Bruce's contributions to the band around this time or on Pet Sound?
I don't think I could imagine anybody else being on God Only Knows.
Yeah.
I definitely love Bruce's part on God Only Knows way more than I like his part on California Girls. I think the way he just fits into the round at the end is perfect. And I think Brian was almost too excited to have him in the band because he was just another toy for him to use. He's like, oh, I got this new guy that I can mess around with. And I think in some weird way, I mean, while I'm sure Pet Sounds would still be considered one of the greatest albums of all time, I don't know if Pet Sounds would still be as Brian would have experimented as much with the voices if he didn't have that extra voice in his little right front pocket waiting for him. Like I still think Pet Sounds obviously would be like one of the greatest albums of all time, and it'd still be like critically reviewed, and we'd still all love it. But like maybe
imagining it with one
slightly different, and it wouldn't quite be the same.
Yeah, I think Bruce really you could say the Beach Boys were moderately big in Europe and the UK before Pet Sounds, but Pet Sounds is really what did it in England in terms of making them a household name and really artistically respected. And I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that probably wouldn't have happened had Bruce not flown out there and personally played the album for Lennon and McCartney. Bruce was really doing the groundwork and making the most of these industry connections that we were talking about throughout the episode to make sure the Beach Boys music was getting heard. And he's done that his whole life to this day, you know, like even when the Beach Boys Disney Plus documentary came out, him and Mike were doing press all around the world, you know, like still Bruce's like area of expertise too is just in getting the music out there, you know.
Definitely came from his time as like inside the industry. Just like how he knew how to be that businessman. He knows what people want to hear for like certain things. And yeah, you know.
Yeah, like it's really easy to joke about him being corny in some of the interviews and saying silly things, but he's definitely mastered for the most part, except for that one political video that you guys have probably seen. For the most part, he's really good at not putting his foot in his mouth and saying things that make the other bandmates look good and not getting too within the band like political. Like he'll never talk down upon Brian or Dennis or Carl or Al. He'll always speak highly of his peers. Um, you know, so that I think is large reason of why he's had such a long career is because so many people burn bridges and he never did that, you know.
So then after Pet Sounds, Brian starts work on Smile, and similarly, Bruce contributes backing vocals to that along with the other guys. But then obviously we all know the story with Smile. The project collapses due to a variety of various different reasons. So then the band works on Smiley Smile, which Bruce really wasn't that involved in from what I've read. Nate, do you kind of want to go into that? Was Bruce really involved in any of Smiley Smile?
I think he was not involved in much, but people have sort of ran with that and minimized it even more. You know, I'm sure he's on it here and there, but without a doubt, during both the Smile and Smiley Smile era, Bruce was getting like freaked out by the behavior and by the drugs and just by the probably overwhelming sense of the band's mental health collapsing. And
Yeah.
I think it was just like probably frankly like frightening for him to be a part of that. And I think he just sort of took a little step back during that whole Smile era. Not to say he didn't make some neat contributions, but for the most part, he's largely absent. I think I think he just saw what was happening to his friends and bandmates and kind of trying to stay one step removed to not sort of fall into those vices and those traps.
Something kind of interesting that I just recently learned reading, I believe it was an interview, is that Bruce actually, even though he didn't contribute that much to Smiley Smile, he like really thought it was a great album. And I think he said like he considers it like one of their most underrated albums. And I believe he said something along the lines of like, this turned out way better than Smile ever would have, which I think is a very interesting quote. From somebody that, you know, didn't even really contribute that much to the album, that he enjoys it that much. So I thought that was an interesting quote.
I think the thing is, sorry to cut you off, but I think the thing is that when it comes to Smile, I don't know if that record could have ever really have been finished back then. I just think that the ambition that Brian had and the technology just wasn't there. Smiley Smile, they stripped it back. They did their thing. People were kind of, you know, didn't know what to think about it at the time. Flash forward 30, 40 years. You have bands like Animal Collective, and where the influence from this album really was that, you know, people listened to it and they liked it for what it was, and they like crafted entire, you know, their entire sound based off of it. So I don't think Bruce was wrong. I think it really is an underrated record, and I think, you know, it was ahead of its time in a way, which I know is used a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point in that Smile is so brilliant, but it's all over the place, and it's a bit of an exhausting listen, even if you love it to death. Whereas Smiley Smile is just sort of floats in the air and it has this like brotherly charm to it. And it's at the very least cohesive. Like almost the entire album has a consistent sound. And yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So then in 1967, after Smiley Smile was kind of a commercial failure for the band, they put out Wild Honey, which is more of like an R&B soul influenced album. Bruce makes two pretty notable contributions to this. He provides the organ solo on Wild Honey, the title track, which I think is a really cool part. I think he does a great job with that. And I believe he also plays bass on that track. And then
bass line.
How She Boogalooed It, Bruce has a co-writing credit, I believe, which is pretty cool as well. And if I'm not mistaken, Nate, does he play the organ part on that as well, on How She Boogalooed It?
Yeah, Bruce is all over Wild Honey, and I think this is really like where you can point to similarly to when we talked about Al or Carl. This is like when Bruce really steps up to the plate and starts sort of contributing beyond just being one of Brian's instruments and being one of the true like creative contributors to the group's sound and image and songs. So yeah, I mean, I actually think a lot of the R&B influence that comes through on this album could very well have been brought to the band. And Carl loved R&B, but Bruce was working on R&B records when Carl was still in high school, you know? Like we talked about that Ron Holden stuff, that was all like classic R&B. So I think Bruce definitely had a knowledge in that realm for sure that he could bring to the band and sort of help put this laid back sort of black music inspired Beach Boys album.
Didn't that outtake of with a little help with a little help from my friends come out around? It was around Wild Honey time, right? That was
Exactly.
And Bruce sings lead on that, right?
He does.
He sings and plays and produced it. So yeah, I mean, this was really when he was sort of given the keys to the kingdom in terms of being able to be like a producer for the band as well.
So then in 1968, the following year, the band puts out the album Friends. I think Bruce has been a little dismissive of this album before. I think he said something along the lines of like he thought it was very like the songs were very like limp or like light. So I don't think he was necessarily the biggest fan of it, but I believe he was pretty heavily involved in it, right, Nate, in terms of like contributing musically, instrumentally.
Yeah, since Mike was gone, I think he was filling in sort of all over the vocal range a lot. You can definitely hear his voice on a lot of those songs, like giving it that airy quality on Meant for You and the title track and Anna Lee.
Before we go any further, I do want to mention another song. This is a non-Beach Boys song that Bruce was involved in. My World Fell Down by the band Sagittarius, which is another one of those kind of like studio group projects. I believe it was run by Gary Usher. Was kind of like one of the main instrumental forces in this project. But the track My World Fell Down is a really great song. I believe Bruce provides both vocals and the arrangement on this, the vocal arrangement. And it's an awesome song. Very like mid 60s Beach Boys sounding with the production and the arrangement. Very like kind of Pet Sounds influenced. Another cool thing about this song is that Glenn Campbell sings the verses, which is really neat. And I think Bruce sings the little chorus part, but really cool song. If any of our listeners haven't heard it, it's an amazing track. Would definitely recommend giving it a listen. My World Fell Down by Sagittarius. So
Something cool that's worth noting about this song, I don't know if it's ever been fully proven as fact, but I think it's probable for sure, is that on the 45 version, there's like a break in the music and it just goes into these sound effects. Yeah, like a sound collage.
yeah.
And there were rumors at the time that they more or less borrowed that sound collage from Brian Wilson and from the Smile tapes.
Oh,
And that some of the sounds on that song originated with Smile era sessions. And again, I think, you know, guys like Mark Lynette and Alan Boyd could probably comment on that and give like a definitive answer. But knowing how closely involved Bruce and Gary Usher were with Brian's scene, I could definitely see that maybe happening.
yeah. Any thoughts on My World Fell Down, Riley and Matt?
Yeah, and in many ways, I mean, I think the Sagittarius stuff as a whole, but especially this song, is almost like proto like dream poppy in a way. It reminds me a lot of what Sunflower or what happened on Sunflower by the Beach Boys. So I'm kind of curious if Bruce got a little bit of like, hey, this stuff sounds pretty good. Why don't we move this over here, Beach Boys?
Yeah.
But
I never made that connection, but that is a really great observation.
even if it wasn't like Bruce, I mean, I think just the general like connection with Gary Usher and the whole like production and Glenn Campbell, the Beach Boys definitely knew about it, and it definitely maybe like sparked a little bit of that stuff that they're gonna do with Sunflower. So I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but
Yeah, it's very like Baroque sunshine pop.
Yeah.
it reminds me of Millennium.
That's another thing. I think either Gary Usher or Kurt Betcher, is that how you say his name? I think he was involved in that as well. Yeah.
5 a.m. You know that song.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's that one song? It kind of has that vibe. The Cowsills song. You know what I'm talking about?
The rain, the park, and other things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of go back to what you said about it, like that whole album in general has a very sunshiny pop sound. That Sagittarius album.
I mean, if it's anything like the Monkees, I think I would really like it because they're very sunshine pop.
Yeah, like the songs. I believe "Song to the Magic Frog" and "Another Time" are two other songs in there that have that sound, and I really love them a lot. I come back to those as well. So, Definitely an album I'd recommend checking out. So in 1969, the Beach Boys released the album 2020, which is kind of a mishmash of material. You have some newer material, you have some stuff from the vault, from like Smile era. But this album is notable for Bruce in that he contributes an instrumental, the track The Nearest Faraway Place, which is kind of like his first original solo composition for the band. I've always liked this instrumental quite a bit. I know it's a little bit divisive. I think it's very pretty. I really like the instrumentation on it. Love like the organ playing, the keyboard playing, and I think the outro is very beautiful as well. So I've always liked this track. I think it's a very cool album track. So any thoughts on 2020 Bruce's contributions?
I think it's fine. I like it as an album cut. I think it's pretty, but it doesn't really have a lot of staying power for me on its own. So I don't really like put it on like if I'm not listening to 2020. And admittedly, I haven't listened to 2020 in a hot minute, so it's probably due for a re-listen sometime soon. But yeah, I mean, I think, as far as like that was his first kind of songwriting credit with the group, it's not bad, but I think that there was better still to come on the next two records.
I'm not a crazy big fan of this one. And upon a re-listen, still not. I think it's pretty for what it is, but I'm almost disappointed now because having listened to a lot of his earlier stuff, like he did with Bruce and Terry, or some of the stuff he did on his solo records, like, dude, this is the best you got to offer. You got to offer. Like, why? I think 2020 would have really benefited from a song like "Don't Run Away" or like "Carmen" or something. Like, you don't like it's kind of backs my point, man. Like I find the instrumental to be a little bit pretty, and I think there's aspects of it that I enjoy, but from like what Bruce did after and before, I honestly wish we got something better. But I'll give a little bit give a little bit of credit. He probably had to come up with it last minute. They were really scrapping for an album, so maybe he didn't have the time to write one of those kind of songs, but it's all right. He's definitely done worse, that's for sure. But
Yeah, I'm pretty with you guys on that one. I kind of go back and forth. I do ultimately feel like it really doesn't necessarily belong, on a Beach Boys album per se. But at the same time, what I love about the Beach Boys is that they basically did touch upon like every major genre. Yeah, so even as far as like country and hard rock and even a little bit of rapping. So, to have like a Muzak kind of song is not like the end of the world. And in a way, I see it as the cousin of Summer Means New Love and Let's Go Away for a While. Like I think it was Bruce trying to do something like those. But yeah, the arrangement falls a little bit flat. It's more or less just a great display of Bruce's piano playing skills, but it doesn't really go much beyond that in terms of being like a captivating listen. I could imagine if vocals were put on top of it, it could be a lot more effective if it was like a backing track for a song and not just a song in itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Bruce has actually some stronger composition or contributions on 2020 beyond the one that he wrote. Bluebirds Over the Mountain was originally going to be maybe a Bruce Johnston solo single, maybe a Bruce and Terry single. I don't think Bruce was quite sure what it was going to be when he was making it, other than that he was just making it for fun. Trying to make something a little funkier. And then, like you mentioned, with 2020, they were really just trying to put together something quickly. And so that got thrown on the album. But I do think that is actually like a really quirky, cool song that was actually successful outside of America as a single, particularly in the Netherlands, I believe. It is cool in that it's like another Beach Boys reinterpreting a standard, sort of in the same vein as Sloop John B or Cotton Fields. Personally, I appreciate Ed Carter's guitar talents, but I think they're not right for the song, or at least for how much it plays throughout the song. Like those real scorching guitar riffs could have been cool if they were used a bit more sparingly instead of just like throughout the entire track. But I do listen to this one a lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of neutral on that one. Like I think it's fine, but it's not one that I listen to outside the context of the album. I kind of agree with you, Nate. Like the guitar kind of like contrasts weirdly with like the rest of the track. Like you have like the horns, like the do 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 do, and then like this ripping guitar comes in. Like you said, it's great playing from Ed Carter, but yeah, it does kind of feel like a weird kind of musical mismatch. But like you said, it is a unique track, and definitely is something different from Bruce for sure. So I do respect it in that regard. So.
And Bruce's vocals definitely add so much to those Smile tracks they included, because, you know, Essence didn't even have vocals during the Smile session.
Mm-hmm.
So all the vocals that were recorded during 2020. And they also added a lot of overdubs to Our Prayer. And so, you know, you had Bruce doing those basically surrogate Brian Wilson parts flawlessly. You know, to me, I listened to Essence and I would assume it was Brian singing those parts.
Yeah.
So to hear, you know, Bruce did a really good job of recreating Brian's tone on those songs.
So then the following year in 1970, the Beach Boys switched labels to Warner Reprise, and they put out the album Sunflower, which is really like one of their most collaborative albums in terms of like the whole group is contributing songs. You have Brian contributing, Dennis contributing, Al, and then of course Bruce contributes 2 songs of his own. Deirdre, which is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. I think it's a really awesome track. I love the production on it. Has that real like sunshiny pop sounding sound, which we were talking about earlier. And I just think it's one of Bruce's strongest tracks he ever contributed. I come back to it a lot. And then the song Tears in the Morning, which from what I've seen seems to be a bit divisive, but I personally enjoy it. It's one of those tracks that's definitely very Bruce. Like it's a very kind of syrupy track. The lyrics are a little bit cheesy in the arrangement, but that said, I do enjoy it quite a bit. And I do think it's a really well-produced song. And I especially love the outro, the way that it ends, like with the keyboard and everything. I think it's very like haunting. So I've always really enjoyed both of Bruce's contributions to Sunflower. Also the song At My Window. I like Bruce's lead vocal. I think it fits the song very well. It's kind of a very like airy kind of light song, and I think that Bruce was the right choice to sing it. So what are your guys' thoughts on Bruce's contributions to the Sunflower album?
I'm a big fan of Deirdre. I love that song. I think that's one of the perfect sunshine pop songs like out there just in general. Yeah. And it wasn't until recently that I learned that it was sampled for
Earthbound. Earthbound.
Yeah, and I listened to it, I'm like, I could barely hear the sample, but then when I listen close, I can kind of hear it. But then you go to like Deirdre and people are like, "Who's here from Earthbound?" And it's just like sounds nothing like it.
No, it does.
Whatever. Cool. Tears in the Morning. Not a fan of this one. Well, that's not true because it kind of has grown on me a bit. There's a lot of aspects of it that I do really like, but I think my main takeaway is that I can't stand Bruce's voice in this song. And then like the slight production touches on top of Bruce's already corny voice makes the song probably more corny than it probably should sound. Because like at face value, it is like a pretty like downer of a song. But like Bruce's voice does not make it seem like a downer of a song, and maybe that's why I just don't care for it. Especially when you get to that little like breakdown and he like slows down his voice, I kind of cringe a little bit. That being said, the song itself is very pretty. I just wish I had a different singer singing it than Bruce.
Dennis could have given a really interesting vocal on there.
Yeah, because I feel like Bruce has a fantastic voice. It works well on songs like Deirdre. It works especially well on a song like Disney Girls. Maybe a different singer sings it. I'm not maybe. If a different singer sang this song, I definitely like it. But I'm curious if Bruce just like has another vocal take out there that I'd appreciate a bit more if he wasn't so like
Brucey.
Right, because I think he could have a better voice for the song.
Or even like his She Believes in Love Again voice. That's like a little raspier.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. Well, I think Bruce...
Different vocal take, I would have loved that song.
I think obviously tied with Carl, I'd say Bruce is like hands down the MVP of Sunflower. And it was like his studio expertise that really helped them, you know, elevate their sound. Like Sunflower is such a leap in terms of the quality of arrangements and of the production from Friends and Wild Honey and 2020, which I love, but just objectively speaking, you know, like the production value takes a big leap. And even with stuff like Cool Cool Water, Bruce had a huge role in completing that. I think he and Al took charge with Cool Cool Water. And Bruce was really involved with the vocals on This Whole World. So just even on songs where he doesn't have a writer's credit per se, or isn't necessarily the star of the song, sort of goes back to my role of just him being a great team player. He's playing bass on Add Some Music to Your Day and playing those really deep piano notes on Forever. So, just cool contributions all around. And to me, speaking of Bruce as like a team player, Sunflower is like one of the greatest examples of him doing that. Of course, he has his few moments to shine as writer, but on every song, he's, playing instruments and contributing vocally and producing. So, yeah, I think, man, Sunflower is just such peak Beach Boys in general in terms of all of them firing on all cylinders. And that, no doubt includes Bruce.
I want to say I think Deirdre is an amazing song. It's probably my favorite Bruce song. So in case our listeners are not familiar with the Earthbound sample, so that's a game wasn't a very popular here at the time, but it has a huge cult following. It was on the Super Nintendo. What they did was they took the intro, slowed it down, and made it sound really haunting. It's like the intro, it's like Deirdre, like where they all do the harmony, and they used it like I think in the villain's cave area of the game, so it's very haunting in the game. That game I know also uses samples from like the Beatles and Rick Ocasek, not the Cars, Rick Ocasek's solo material, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, I love Deirdre. Very like great sunshiny pop song as was mentioned. This is a song where I think Bruce's vocal works really well. Like, at 10, I'll wake you and then. That's probably like my favorite part of the song.
Kind of like a McCartney kind of like style thing.
Yeah.
Tears in the Morning, I think is fine. I like it in the context of Sunflower. I don't really put it on by itself, but it is kind of always makes me laugh to hear Bruce in that voice sing "Damn."
What you're damn sure of.
Yeah. Damn sure.
Dude, that's where a separate vocal take would have worked perfectly.
Like it's just I don't know why. It's just first of all I think it's fun. I think it's the first time we've ever had swearing on a Beach Boys song.
Yeah.
And it's Bruce of all people.
It's Bruce of all people singing it.
Probably first and last time that I can think of. Maybe aside from Rolling Up to Heaven.
I mean
that doesn't count.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Yeah, I also love his vocal on you took the baby, I'm never gonna see. Like it's just so like very cheesy. But again, I do like the song. I just think it's a very well written and produced song. But I can see why some people struggle with the vocal for sure. I totally get it. It is very trippy.
Wasn't this around the time too that they were thinking about replacing Bruce with Billy Hinchy?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. I think
probably a little later since he was like, so integral. I think that probably would have come about a little towards like the Blondie and Ricky era. Probably.
I read that it was around mid '69 was when they first were discussing this, and then obviously during that era, Bruce started having some tension with the band, of course. But
outsider looking in, sorry to cut you off, but I wonder if Bruce always kind of felt like an outsider looking in because he was never part of Brother Records or anything like that.
Yeah, he's basically said as much, that he almost felt like that was like his biggest strength in terms of being a part of the Beach Boys, was that they were all like a family. So they sort of had like a tunnel vision about everything they did because it was all familial matters to everyone else. But to him, he sort of had an outside looking in type perspective. So for sure.
One other thing I quickly wanted to mention, Nate, if you could confirm this, the intro to Deirdre, which Matt was talking about. First off, that's like very haunting on its own, even before like the Earthbound edit. Like it's a very like odd intro to the song because like it's so haunting, and then it's like this really sunshiny pop sounding song, but the intro is really cool. I read that those vocals at the start, that's all Bruce, just like layered on different layers of Bruce's voice. Is that true? Like yeah, that's really cool. It shows like his talent as like a vocal arranger, that he did all those parts. So
yeah, probably a little bit of a, what do you call it, tape phasing too, to make it sound like that.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
All right. So then following Sunflower, the band releases in 1971 the album Surf's Up, which is notable for Bruce, and that it has probably his most well-known composition with the Beach Boys, Disney Girls. I absolutely love this song. I've talked about it on the podcast before. I think it's a beautiful track. I love everything about it. I love the production. I love the arrangement. I think Bruce's vocal fits it really well. And I really like the melancholic lyrics, kind of longing for the past in a more simple time. So I've always really loved this song. I think Bruce did a fantastic job with it. and I can see why it's been covered by a lot of artists over the years because I just think it's a beautiful track. So definitely my favorite by Bruce. As much as I love Deirdre, I would definitely give this one the edge for myself. But any thoughts on Bruce's contribution to Surf's Up or any of his other work on the album?
It's pretty funny because Disney Girls is one of my first favorite Beach Boys songs in general. When I was like originally surfing the catalog, that was so unintentional. Oh my God.
That's something I feel like Bruce would approve
That
of.
was like I consider myself a bit of a jokester, but that was completely unintentional. Yeah, when I was originally going through the catalog, this was one of the first songs that really clicked with me. And I didn't really know who wrote it. I just really enjoyed the song. And then I did look at the songwriting credits after a while, and I didn't really know the members so well, and this is actually how I kind of got into like knowing who was who in the band. Is when I figured out that Bruce Johnston joined a bit later on, but I still loved the song. It's one that I'd always go back to. I think I honestly over listened to it, and it's kind of lost a little bit of its power because of that, but it's such a gorgeous song. The production touches, the chord changes, the emotion in his voice. Like I feel like this is like my ideal Bruce vocal because it still has a little bit of that like campiness to it, but it doesn't overtake the song at all. And it just fits with that theme of like nostalgia and innocence in it. Its placement on Surf's Up too is incredible.
Yeah.
It just really it was honestly like Bruce was in the right place at the right time when he made the song. I don't even care about that line with the Tootsie Roll in it. Like it goes against everything I want in lyrics. But it just fits the song so well.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, it's maybe not my favorite song from Surf's Up, but if there's any song that was to like relay the themes of the album, I think this one might be the one next to Till I Die.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because I've seen people say like, like, oh, like this song doesn't really fit in with the album. Like it's so like soft and like I completely disagree with that. I think it totally fits in. Like the longing lyrics, the melancholic feeling, that's throughout this album. On the other songs, while the other songs might sound darker and have like even more like darker lyrics, introspective lyrics, I think that this song is definitely one of the most moving moments on the entire album. And I've always loved it, and I think it fits in well. So.
I think that this is a song that's a very good reflection of the loss of innocence. I know we had talked about this earlier. Yeah. It's just and this might be one of the first songs that was like 50s nostalgia before American Graffiti 62, but like before Happy Days, before Laverne and Shirley and all that, because this is 71.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see this almost as like Bruce's kind of response to the Vietnam War and going on with the country at the time and the protests and everything. Whereas like, and what's kind of interesting is that if you look at the placement on the album, this is kind of Bruce's response, which is like, kind of going back to like the rather conservative, but more wholesome 50s and like that nostalgia and like the idea of like a Disney girl and, like the picket white fence and all that.
Yeah.
You have Mike's student demonstration time right next to it, which is his response to all of that going on. And gives not kind of that's like the ultimate mixed message of a song, but yeah, it's a very pretty song, a very evocative song, and I love the breakdown where like the song comes down and it's like you hear like the great song, but I still prefer Deirdre a smidge, but it's still a great song.
I think it's like hands down one of the best songs ever written. I think it's just so I think it's up there with the Beach Boys' most like evocative works, like I Just Wasn't Made for These Times or The Warmth of the Sun. And that it really just, to me, it feels like it connects you to something of like a higher power. And you have an amazing Brian Wilson backing vocal with one of the last songs where I feel like Brian is doing his true classic Brian Wilson falsetto. And to me, the harmonies are just knockout gorgeous. And like Riley mentioned, the chord progression is so slick and so, satisfying. And the song just is so dreamy, and every time I listen to it, I just think like, God damn, this is gorgeous. Like it's so heavy in like a beautiful way, not in like a heavy metal kind of way, but just like in a way that it makes you feel something so heavily.
Yeah.
A masterpiece, through and through masterpiece. To me, just as good as anything on Pet Sounds.
Yeah. To me, it's one of the most moving songs in the catalog that Brian didn't write. If we're talking about all the other members' contributions, like this is definitely, I feel like it for me. It's just such a moving song. And also I love the outro, like with the whistling at the end. Like it's so like melancholic and moving. The song fades out. And this is one of those songs that I actually will just listen to the backing track from time to time from the Feel Flows box set, just because like it's that beautiful. Like I love the arrangement. I love listening to all the different parts. Like Nate mentioned, the backing vocals are really beautiful as well. Yeah, just a really, really moving song. So Bruce did a fantastic job with this. It was covered by multiple artists, like I mentioned. Two of those covers that we listened to prior to this episode were Art Garfunkel's cover, which I believe came out in the late 70s. And then also Cass Elliot from the Mamas and the Papas did a cover of it as well. Do you guys have any thoughts on those two covers of the song?
Well, I think it's cool that Bruce contributed to both of those. Like they weren't necessarily solely covers, but he was like present in the studio for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the coolest thing about Cass Elliott's version is that the backing vocals are credited to the Beach Mamas, which is Carl, Bruce, and Cass Elliott doing all the harmonies together. And so I think that's like a gorgeous sound. And when I found that out, I pictured like an alternate universe where Bruce and Carl and Cass Elliott did actually do some sort of side project called like the Beach Mamas or something like that. And that could have been those three together could have been really interesting results. But yeah, I think that the fact that so many people covered it is just a great testament to what a perfect song it is. That you can have really so many different singers sing their interpretation, but that beauty will remain whoever sings it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cass Elliot did a nice job with it, but I don't think I like the arrangement as much as the Beach Boys version. It kind of like, I think you were the one to point out, Jake, like it repeats that one part.
It repeats the bridge, like the hi Rick, hi Dave, hi
Yeah,
Pop.
yeah.
That should only be the bridge. Like that doesn't need to be repeated throughout the song. So I'm not.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't really remember Art Garfunkel's version, so I listened to it, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
I'm not the biggest fan of Cass Elliot in general, so
Interesting.
I don't know what it is. Her voice doesn't really like. She's a great backing vocalist, but I don't know.
You say it doesn't like emotionally resonate with you in any way.
It's never been able to emotionally like. You said it better than I could, man. It's just never really like emotionally clicked with me.
Yeah.
Like I think objectively she's a great singer, but like there's some artists where their vocals like never clicked with me. Like off the top of my head, Kurt Cobain.
Interesting.
Which I know, like again, objectively great vocalist. Like I mean, he has like John Lennon's voice on steroids, but it's just missing that small thing. Anyways, however, I think the backing track on Cass Elliott's is pretty good. It's a bit stripped back, obviously, but I think it works pretty cool. Obviously, like I said, the voice doesn't work with me. I like Art Garfunkel's voice. But the backing track doesn't work for me on that one. So if you like, it would be like the perfect cover. I don't think it would beat the original, but it would be the perfect cover of it.
That would be an interesting project. Try to combine the two.
One last thing about Surf's Up in relation to Bruce. He criticized this album. He called it a hyped up lie after its release, which I think was kind of in regards to the fact that the band was trying to kind of market it as like a Brian Wilson is back album. Like we have like
exactly
tracks on here, like it's Surf's Up is on here, and it's like Brian's comeback, when in reality like it was really kind of just another group project, and then they were kind of like scrapping some Brian songs onto the album. That said, Brian did make some great contributions to the album in terms of both vocals and songs, but I think that's kind of what Bruce was getting at with that comment. So
yeah, I would say this album is more Carl's than anything else, because he really blossomed into a songwriter, and he was really responsible for like really a lot of the production and grunt work on it.
So following Surf's Up, this is kind of a transition period for the band starts, where Blondie and Ricky come in and they do the album Carl and the Passion So Tough, which comes out in 1972. Bruce contributes a little bit to the song Marcella from that album, but besides that, Bruce doesn't contribute much because he leaves the band around this time. Nate, do you kind of want to get into what happened there? I know that there's multiple stories of, did he get fired? Did he just choose to leave because of creative differences? Do you kind of want to get into like what the story is there?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think outside of the band themselves and, Jack Riley and their wives and their close associates, I think people will probably never know for sure what happened in this era. And I think also, like the expression, like history is written by the winners, or I may have butchered that a little bit, but, Bruce has been like the second longest lasting member in the band. So he, in a way, sort of got to rewrite his own history a little bit. So, but I'd say whether or not he was quit or fired is sort of besides the point, because in terms of talking about his career, man, he got busy in those like 7 years that he was out of the group.
Yeah.
When I first was learning about the Beach Boys, I pictured it like almost as if he was like retired or something, just because I didn't realize how prolific he was during those just short few years. But during that time, he's working with America, Elton John, Roger McGuinn, Barry Mann, Captain and Tennille, Papa Do Run Run, Jane and Dean, and he started Johnston Records. And on his record label, he was producing bands and acts like Bill House, and Peter Noon had a group called the Tremblers that Bruce produced that album. So, and he started California Music with Terry and Brian Wilson. So, I mean, he was extremely prolific in this era. And I guess we could each probably just pick a few choices from those few years that stood out to us.
Well, probably the most noteworthy song I would say is I Write the Songs, because not only was it, I believe, a #1 hit or was very high on the charts, it earned Bruce a Grammy for Song of the Year. So he became the first Beach Boy to ever win a Grammy. And I think he even commented on the ridiculousness that I have a Song of the Year Grammy and Brian doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he said something like, how unfortunate is it that I win one, but somehow Brian Wilson and the rest of the band hasn't? Like, that's just insane. So,
yeah, anybody who's using the Grammys as a barometer of quality, you're already fighting a losing game, because, yeah, they're driven by commercialism. That's what they are.
In terms of some notable songs from this period that I wanted to mention that Nate suggested that we listen to, I know Bruce did the vocal arrangements on the song Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, which Carl is also featured as a backing vocalist on. I really like that song quite a bit. I think it's a very pretty ballad. I love how clear Carl's voice is in that mix. I think it's like so cool hearing him on that song. So I've always loved that one quite a bit, and I think Bruce did a great job with it. A song that I didn't know at all until Nate shared it with us. I believe it's called Common Thief.
Yeah.
House. I love this song. I think it's awesome. Very kind of like a Blue-Eyed Soul sounding song, has a real kind of like funky groove to it. I really dig this a lot. Bill House obviously has some other Beach Boys connections. I know he co-wrote Make It Big, I believe, as well. Which
right. I was trying to remember when I was making the playlist. I'm like, Bill House. I'm like, why does that name sound so familiar?
Right.
Yeah, he's all over the Terry albums.
Yeah, but I enjoyed that song quite a bit, so thank you for introducing that to me, Nate. And then, of course, I also want to mention She Did It by Eric Carmen. Bruce is featured as a backing vocalist, and I think he also helped with the arrangement there. I've always liked that song a lot. Very Beach Boys inspired for sure. And then to go to I Write the Songs by Barry Manilow. I think it's a very Bruce song for sure. Like, it's not a surprise at all that Bruce wrote this. Like, it totally sounds like something that he would write.
But it fits Barry Manilow because that's how he is. That's his style.
Right. It's funny to me that it's called I Write the Songs when Barry Manilow didn't write the song. I've always found that very amusing. But in terms of the song, I think it's fine. It's not something I really like choose to put on. That said, musically, I think it's decent. I think it's a decent ballad. I do like the middle eight quite a bit. I think it's very Bruce, but I do like it. It's kind of an interesting change in the song. Very like overblown kind of Barry Manilow style performance on it, but that said, I think it's a fine song. I can see why it was a #1 hit, but definitely prefer Bruce's contributions with the Beach Boys to that for sure. But and then one last song I wanted to mention from this time, Wouldn't Die by the Tremblers, which Nate mentioned. I had no idea that Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits had a little power pop group for a while, but I enjoyed this song quite a bit. Wouldn't Die.
On Johnston Records, of all places.
Yeah, I enjoyed that song quite a bit. I thought it was a fun little power pop track, so that was very neat. Obviously, also, he had some contributions with Pink Floyd as well, but I'll leave that for Riley to talk about. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Bruce's other work outside the Beach Boys during this time.
I want to say my favorite is probably Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. That is one of my favorite Elton John songs.
Beautiful. Yeah.
The vocals are great. I love, like you said, you can hear Carl so clear. I believe that was recorded at Caribou Ranch.
The album's called Caribou, I think. Yeah.
And one last thing about, and I'll let Riley talk to this about Peter Noon. I didn't know he had a power pop group either. I knew he was Hermits, Hermits. And then the other thing I heard from was, have you ever heard his version of "Oh You Pretty Things"? He sang what Bowie did. It's okay. He
It's all right. Fun
It's
as
all
it
right.
is, no sin. It's that time again. Hit the road.
Okay, well, I'll talk about Pink Floyd.
Yeah. So let's sidetrack for a little bit. So around 1977, Roger Waters was getting super pissed off during the Pink Floyd Animals tour in the US. So much so that he even spit on a fan so they'd shut up. He was so pissed off. And all he could think about is like, you know what if we didn't have to deal with the audience? What if we just put up a wall? A wall? What? That's fucking crazy. Let's write an album about it. So that's what he did. And The Wall is one of my favorite albums of all time. Uh, and he wanted to do so much with it. It's probably arguably Pink Floyd's like grandest experiment next to Dark Side of the Moon with what they wanted to do. He wrote a full-fledged rock opera. And for one of the songs later on in the album, when like the character Pink is like in this like hallucination dream, whatever, it's just like him going back to the show to like perform because Pink is a rock star in the rock opera. Roger Waters wanted the entirety of the Beach Boys to sing backing on one of the tracks. However, and it was actually planned that they were all going to do it, but unfortunately that didn't really pan out. I mean, after all, this is 1978, 79 Beach Boys. They weren't exactly like friendly with each other. So the only person that I was actually able to go do it was Bruce Johnston. Bruce Johnston also brought along Tony Tennille, which I thought was pretty cool. And Bruce not only sang the backing vocals for The Show Must Go On, but he also arranged them, which I thought was awesome. And similarly to how you said, Nate, that Bruce was super professional and he worked for the context of what was needed for the song. He didn't go like all out and make it all about him. He did what he thought would fit the album the most. And it's honestly one of the coolest songs in the album. There's not many Floyd songs with vocal stacks, and I think this one has always stood out to me. Even though it's not one of my favorite songs on the album, I think it is definitely like one of the high points of what this album does in terms of experimentation. And I think it's awesome they got Bruce Johnston to do it. I think he does a fantastic job. As far as I know, he also arranged some of the vocals for In the Flesh. So I don't know if you guys have ever listened to The Wall, but it's really cool.
I really like the arrangement on The Show Must Go On. Like you can definitely tell like that Roger Waters was going for like a very like Beach Boys inspired arrangement there. So it makes sense that he brought Bruce in. And yeah, I think it's an awesome arrangement there. So I'm definitely gonna when I listen to that full album eventually, I'm definitely gonna appreciate it back even more. I think so.
Yeah. So from this era, I mean, Riley, you summed that all up perfectly. I've listened to the album before. But really, the ones I've returned to the most are the ones that I knew that Bruce contributed to, just so I could hear that. But it's really interesting to hear that like artistic perspective of Roger Waters and all that. But yeah, for these 70s songs, I really like some of the California music experiments, particularly the song California Music itself, which has a bit of like a disco vibe to it. In fact, I think it's the same drum loop that Bruce would reuse for Here Comes the Night. I really like there's Jane and Dean, really just Dean at this point with Bruce and Terry, re-recorded Gonna Hustle You, which originated as a Brian Wilson composition, and I think that version that they released in 1973 just kicks ass, and Bruce played piano on there and backing vocals and helped arrange it. And the same can be said about Be True to Your School with Papa Do Run Run, which I really enjoy. That was a national hit for them, and Bruce produced that. I think I really enjoy Terry Melcher did an album, like a concept album called Royal Flush with all these kind of mariachi or Mexican Latin inspired songs, and a couple of singles from that album were issued as Bruce and Terry singles, and I really love the song LA to Mexico. I think that is just a really neat song, and I love hearing sort of the 70s version of Bruce and Terry, a little more mature. And it's funny because in that LA to Mexico song they say get there fast and take it slow, and we all know where Terry Melcher would reuse that line about a decade later. So it was interesting for me when I was getting ready for this episode to notice that. And I guess we'd also be remiss without saying that Bruce made some great contributions like Matt alluded to earlier on Pacific Ocean Blue. He's all over that vocally. And it's funny, on End of the Show, the Dennis Wilson song, he's on there and arranged that. And then he also did Go in Public during this time, which is certainly a mixed bag of an album. But for me, the version of I Write the Songs on here is my favorite version of the song. To me, the song is a nice song, whoever sings it, but hearing the actual composer of I Write the Songs sing the song to me is far more meaningful, even if the production is almost non-existent and it's mostly just a vocal and piano. I love Disco Pipeline. I think it kicks ass for what it is. I'm a big ELO fan, and it definitely reminds me of ELO. And then finally, there's like this little hidden gem on Going Public, Rock and Roll Survivor, which is a bit of a Bruce Johnston country song.
Yeah.
But it's just such a pretty, charming song, and it's really got a lot of earworms, so that one gets stuck in my head really easily. But to me, yeah, Rock and Roll Survivor and Pipeline would be the highlights of Going Public to me. Thank You Baby is a beautiful song, but the version on this album is a little bit too slow and morose. To me, it is just a cool thing to have, kind of like in a similar way to Looking Back with Love. I might not listen to it all the time, but it is. I'm glad to have it. I'm glad it exists, even if it's not like perfection.
Yeah, I have to say, not a big fan of Disco Deirdre on there. I think it takes all the charm out of the song. But in terms of Pipeline, I think I enjoy it more watching that video of Bruce playing it on like that show. Then I kind of vibe with it, but like just listening to it by itself, it doesn't really do that much for me. I think it's fine. I can see why you like it, Nate, but it doesn't really do too much for me. I can see
the video is what sold me too.
Yeah, right. Bruce just vibing with the bass, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like the rest of the album, yeah, it's pretty lackluster for me. I can definitely see the appeal in his performance of I Write the Songs. I would say, I don't know if I'd say I enjoy it more, but I do see why you like it quite a bit, Nate. It is cool hearing the person that actually wrote the song, sing the song. I think it works well with the stripped back arrangement. Won't Somebody Dance With Me is hilarious in terms of just, it's a funny listen with the underwater production and just like the cheesy vocal from Bruce. But yeah, besides that, it's not really a great album in my opinion. I was gonna have all of us listen to it, and then after listening to it, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna say we don't have to do that. So yeah, not the best album from Bruce, but I can see why they put it together. It was kind of to piggyback off the success of I Write the Songs, so I can see why it was. Any thoughts?
And one thing I'll say too, in terms of being a team player, is like I know that Bruce was friends with all these surf California legends, and I know that he was like trying to get Gary Usher back in the scene, so he let Gary Usher produce the album, really just to give his friend an opportunity. And I think that's at least noteworthy to mention, since we're all such Gary Usher fans with all the stuff he did for the Beach Boys.
Right.
No, I was good.
Sucks.
Thank you for not making us listen to that album. I really didn't feel like it. I just wanted to say, Nate, I did not know that he did all that on Pacific Ocean Blue. That's really cool because I really do love that record. And like I said, Dennis's little note to God bless you, Bruce. It'll always be good in my book for that one.
Yeah, it's a great stamp of approval, at least musically.
It sucks.
It sucks.
It sucks.
Okay.
In many ways, I feel like Bruce was almost forced to make it, and that's partly why it sucked. Yeah. He tried his best to make it a bit like artistic, but yet also fit that Barry Manilow song. So like he was kind of stuck in like between a rock and a hard place, where it's like, well, I gotta make it, but I also gotta fit the song, so I can't really do anything like crazy creative. So I'm just gonna make the worst like Beach Boy solo album I can.
It's funny because when he was asked about it, he said he didn't want to make it, but he was paid a lot of money to do it. So you're right on the money with that.
But there's one thing we can say about Bruce. He's always honest.
All right. So I was going to say we should dive into Bruce kind of rejoining the Beach Boys, but in a way, he never really left because he was still contributing to most of their albums during this period when he was technically not a member. One of his more notable contributions that I felt was worth a mention was on I'll Bet He's Nice from Love You. You can clearly hear Bruce during the fade out at the end, during the well, it's you, pretty darling. You can totally hear Bruce in the vocal mix there. So are there any other notable examples you can think of, Nate, where you can hear Bruce during some of these mid-'70s, later '70s Beach Boys albums?
You know, he was
California Saga, Blueberry Hill, Ceylon Sailor.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely some key tracks for sure. And yeah, you put it perfectly. Like he technically quit the band, but he was still joining them on stage when they were in the same city, and he was still singing on all the albums except for MIU. So him leaving the band is almost kind of a technicality, but if you didn't know, he more or less was kind of just, in a way, still in the band, just available less often. Because, you know,
Right.
even if you think about like when they had the Love You like release party, Bruce was there. He was
Mhm.
taking pictures as a member of the band. So like, yeah, he was doing other things, but it's not like they were estranged. They were still friends, and he would still visit the sessions and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind of puts away like the whole like, you know, oh, he got fired thing. It's like obviously there couldn't have been that much tension there if he was still like happily agreeing to, you know, appear on albums and hang out with them all the time. So obviously their relationship never really soured there between him and the actual members. So
Yeah, well, him and Dennis were like this, so I don't think that, you know, like they were friends for so many years. I don't think it's gonna like just disappear overnight like that.
right. All right, so Nate, do you kind of want to get into how Bruce becomes an official member of the band once again around the time of like the LA Light album and how he gets brought back into the fold?
Yeah, so yeah, I guess to put it simply, the Beach Boys had a new record deal,
See,
and yep, and there was a lot of anticipation, and they even went so far as like stipulating that they demanded contributions from Brian Wilson.
yeah,
And obviously Brian was in very poor health at this time. And during the initial sessions, I think, you know, Brian was giving it his all, or as much as he could at that time, but he just quickly realized that he wasn't up to the challenge.
mhm,
Not to mention, both of Brian's brothers were also going through some personal or, you know, health or other, you know, related drama. Mike and Al had both sort of made attempts to steer the ship, and, you know, to varying degrees of success. So the writing was kind of on the wall that they needed to call in someone that could sort of turn this sinking ship around. And like, who better than Bruce? Because like we've mentioned, he was able to sort of be like objective and an outsider looking in, but he also, you know, probably knew the band better than anyone else. So yeah, he you know, the results are certainly mixed, but he was definitely like the MVP of putting together both LA and keeping the summer alive. And without him, it's really possibly quite likely that the band could have broken up during this time period. They were
yeah,
so damn close to breaking up when you hear some of these stories.
yeah,
And it's a miracle that Bruce like agreed to step into that position. Especially because he was like knowingly stepping into an extremely difficult position, you know, trying to be like the mediator between these guys that could no longer get along, a
yeah,
family that could no longer get along. So when you take account all the stressful things that were going on, I think it's like a little easier to forgive some of the mixed production choices on these albums. Because he was probably as much of a producer, he was also a therapist, you know, and like
yeah,
a mediator for the guys' like personal issues with each other. And so it probably wasn't as easy for him as, you know, a Bruce and Terry record or something like that. But that's because he was kind of being a different type of producer, less
right,
about sounds and more about keeping the guys from fighting each other.
yeah. Yeah, in a way, I kind of view it like he was kind of like filling in the space that Brian could not fill anymore at this point. Like you said, Brian was not well at this time. And like you said, the band had a very lucrative record deal with CBS, so they needed to put together something. So yeah, they brought on Bruce. And like you said, I really don't know what would have happened if that didn't happen or if Bruce didn't agree to join the fold again. because he obviously played a huge role in getting this album done, as well as Carl. I know Carl contributed a lot to this album as well. In terms of some of my favorite actual like contributions from Bruce on this album, I really like. I know he did a lot of the backing vocals on Good Timin, the title track. I'm pretty sure from what I read. Also, I really love his high falsetto part on "Love Surrounds Me," like that super high note. I think you said that was Bruce, right, Nate? That falsetto.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, that's just really cool, really haunting. I think it really fits the song well. And then also, of course, we have to mention "Here Comes the Night," which was kind of like Bruce's project on this album. The disco remake of the Wild Honey track. I've never been the biggest fan of it. I think if it was shorter by like 6 minutes, 5 minutes, it would be a more enjoyable track. But that said, I don't think it's like the most interesting disco track. And I think, like Matt has said before, like the worst thing with disco is boring disco. And to me, this is just not the most interesting disco. But that said, I do respect the effort to try something new. Like you said, Nate, the Beach Boys have kind of covered all genres, and this is kind of them taking on like the disco sound. But I don't think it works that well, in my opinion. But respect the effort for sure.
Yeah,
in my opinion, I'd say it works extremely well as a 3 or 4 minute single, like the 45 version. Really exciting, really impactful, doesn't overstay its place, doesn't overstay its welcome, I should say. But as a 12-minute track, it's just kind of beats you to death a little bit.
I agree everything you said. It's just, I think if it was tightened up, it wouldn't be so bad. And I also don't know if that was, and I think I've said it before, I don't know if that was the best song to try to make a disco version of. It's kind of a weird choice. I feel like there might have been something better, maybe something, I don't know. But yeah, it's just kind of, it's too long. Just goes on for ages.
Yeah. You got like, and they really threw the kitchen sink at it too. Like I've mentioned, the monkey noises, all the different keyboard sounds and everything. Like they were trying to make it work. And yeah, for me, that long version just does not work at all. I also want to mention, I believe the track Sumahama, part of what I like about that song so much is like the arrangement. And I'm pretty sure from what I've read, Bruce is mostly responsible for that, Nate. Yeah, I really like the arrangement on that. So credit to Bruce for that.
Yeah, it's really like the way that the drum and bass rhythms are on Sumahama is like very unorthodox and very compelling. And I am curious like where they got the idea to have that like odd like syncopation with the beat, but it works out, kind of makes the song more interesting, I'd say.
All right, so we'll now move on to the next Beach Boys album, which is also another Bruce Johnston produced album, Keeping the Summer Alive. I know that this album is often very maligned and criticized by fans, mostly from what I've read from the production or for the production. In my opinion, the production does hinder a lot of these songs. I think that the album is honestly just very soft and light. And I think that if this album had some more powerful rocking guitar, some heavier drums, just really like, amp the energy with a lot of these songs, I think they'd be a lot more enjoyable. But for me, yeah, the production on this album, it's hard to describe it, but like it almost sounds kind of like artificial, like plasticky in places. Like they're not giving the song space to breathe. And for that reason, I feel like songs that I would actually really like Santa Ana Winds from Al, and Keeping the Summer Alive, the title track, I feel like are just held back by the production on here. So I don't think it's Bruce's best work as a producer on here, but that said, there are some enjoyable moments on here, and I do like Bruce's contribution, Endless Harmony, at the end. I think it is a fitting outro for the album. So
I was super shocked, like when it dawned on me that Tremblers Peter Noon album that he did and Keeping the Summer Alive were done so close to each other, because imagine if that Keeping the Summer Alive had the same sort of like testosterone that Tremblers album did. Like it would have been perfect.
Yeah.
And I do think what made Keeping the Summer Alive sound the way it does, from what I've read and learned about it, is that on one hand, they started at Western and a lot of the studios that they had been familiar with. But at some point in the project, they like upped and relocated to Al's barn, and they were turning it into a studio as they were recording it, which is something they did at Brian's house with Smiley Smile, and they did it in
Holland,
Iowa and Holland. Yeah, so they kept doing this over and over again, and every time they did it, the sonics of the album kind of suffered. So you think they would have learned at this point. So you have that going on, sort of like a makeshift studio vibe. They even brought Steven Desper to try to help, and he did what he could. But it seems somewhat easy to understand in hindsight that if you record an album in a studio as you're building the studio, it's going to sound a little weird.
Yeah.
And then also, I know that Bruce and Carl were having like a lot of disagreements about the direction of the album. Like, I think Bruce's intention was to, by all accounts, make like a hard rocking Beach Boys album that sort of reflected the shows they were doing at that time, like the Washington D.C. show and the Nebworth show, which really showed that they could like really rock out. But that Carl was getting really into his like MOR, like adult contemporary stuff, and so Bruce claims that like when he already submitted the mixes as finished, Carl went in afterwards and changed them up. And so again, that could be how I said, the winners rewrite history. Like Bruce could just be saying that all these decades later to save face. But yeah. And then or I guess Matt, you can say what you got anything about this album.
No, pretty much everything you guys said. I just think that it's kind of like, I think there are some nice songs on here, but production is a little flat. But there are still some songs that stick out in a positive way.
Yeah.
Living with a Heartache and, Oh Darling. But yeah, Endless Harmony, I know I voted yes on it. I do really like parts of it. We voted yes when we did our best of compilation. I do really like parts of it, and I think that there's enough good in it to like carry it, but some of those lyrics are very Bruce.
For sure. It's definitely one of the most, like, it's one of the Bruceiest songs that Bruce has ever wrote, for sure. Like, nobody else in the band could have wrote something like that. And I know that song, I love it as Endless Harmony, but I know it has kind of an interesting history because was it 10 years of harmony, Nate?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah, during like the Carl and the Passions session.
Yeah, so they really sat on that song for a while before finally putting it out. But yeah, I've always really liked the song, like with the instrumental arrangement. The keyboards are so haunting. Love the outro. I love that falsetto from Bruce at the end. Still gives me chills to this day.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just I think it's a very moving performance, even if, like Matt said, the lyrics are some of the cheesiest in the Beach Boys catalog. So
yeah, I think not many would say, including himself, that he was like a gifted lyricist. But I think his songs, the music is so like overwhelmingly gorgeous that it sort of makes the lyrics a bit more acceptable. And you almost start to fall in love with them eventually just because the music is so powerful.
Yeah.
And then one thing I guess I wanted to say, sort of to transition a little bit into, I think you can kind of like look at Bruce's career from 1980 to this exact day, December 1st, 2024, as like one sort of large chapter. I think it was at this point that Bruce, in a way, became like a ambassador for the Beach Boys brand, aside from just being a band member. Like, Al and Carl are band members too, but they weren't out doing interviews on TV every week and things like that. Whereas, Mike and Bruce would go on VH1 and they'd go on MTV and they'd go visit with politicians. And Bruce just he and Mike sort of took it upon themselves to become, like brand ambassadors almost for the Beach Boys. And as we know, not to fast forward too much, but eventually the Beach Boys just becomes Mike and Bruce and the musicians that they tour with. And we have so much to owe to Bruce for there being like a Beach Boys today, because if not for him, it would, basically just be the Mike Love band. But having Bruce there for all these years has really added so much to the authenticity of experiencing one of their shows. And the only reason I'm making this segue now is what I would call his entire contribution of the last 40, 50 years is he's keeping the summer alive. He's helping to keep the summer alive.
For sure, for sure.
Like he would, his footprint in terms of the band's studio material at this point on, he would start to have like a lighter presence on a lot of the albums, mostly just being a backing vocalist. And but yeah, he really like rose to the plate of being one of the people that has continued the band both as a stage act and just as a brand for all these years, which has totally added to the lifespan of the group by, decades.
Right. And to kind of add to that, I feel like you listen to Bruce talk in interviews, and like the guy still has a really good memory. He's a great storyteller. I've enjoyed listening to different interviews with him over the years. Obviously, very knowledgeable about music too. So it's interesting to hear his perspective on, the different bands and artists of both the time and today. So yeah, I just think, like you said, he's a great ambassador for the band to this day. And again, him being out there with Mike definitely adds something to the current, Beach Boys band. The fact that it's not just the Mike show, Bruce is there too. The fact that you have two Beach Boys there definitely, I feel like legitimizes it more for more people, so.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So now moving on to Beach Boys 85, or the Beach Boys self-titled album from 1985. As Riley has mentioned before, Steve Levine produced this album, who had done production work for Culture Club. Bruce's main contribution on this album is the track She Believes in Love Again. Riley really loves this song, which I'm sure he'll talk about it. But in terms of my thoughts on it, I think it's an okay ballad. It has grown on me over time. I do really like the middle eight. I think Carl's vocals on this add quite a bit to the song. To be honest, I probably wouldn't like this one as much if Bruce sang the whole thing. I think Carl definitely elevates the song. That said, I don't think it's like a standout song. It's not one that I think is any better than a lot of other kind of like general 80s power ballads from the time, but I can definitely see why some people enjoy it. And I think it's a decent track. It's not like a skip for me by any means. So any thoughts on She Believes in Love Again?
I think it's a really pretty song.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it in a while, but I remember really enjoying it the last time I listened to it.
I love She Believes in Love Again. I think in many ways it's because of the Carl vocal that saves it. But Bruce does kind of give a bit of like a raspy, like hearty vocal that is reminiscent, not fully the same, but reminiscent of Disney Girls, I would say. And I think the 80s production honestly works to his favor because 80s production is all about like how many synths and like cheesy sounds can I put in there and make it work. And especially on this album with Steve Levine producing it. Keep in mind, I think the production's fantastic and it's very creative, and that's why I've always loved 80s production. And I think it just works for Bruce in his favor. And then you have Carl giving such an amazing vocal on the song. Again, it kind of goes against everything I believe in when it comes to like songwriting and like cheesiness levels in a song. But for whatever reason, maybe it's the Beach Boys magic, maybe it's Steve Levine or Carl, whatever, all of that together, it makes for what I think is a pretty damn good song. And that 2012 version he did fucking sucks, man. It takes away all the magic that the 80s version had. I don't think it's one of the best on 85, but I think 85 is also full of bangers, and I think there honestly isn't a miss on there. So it's like I love it. I think it's a great song, and I don't think it often gets enough praise, especially when we talk about Bruce songs.
Yeah. It goes against everything you believe in, but you do believe in love again.
Fuck you.
Yeah, you guys know I love me a Bruce Johnston song, but this one, I really do agree with everything Riley said about it. Like it is a pleasant song, but if I had to point to any song as being like Bruce doing a pastiche of himself and just sort of relying on like all the tricks that he had learned without really making something very like new or original, I would kind of point to this and Happy Endings. And I like both of them. I really like both of them and think they're nice songs, but they're just like a little less ambitious as like Tears in the Morning, Disney Girls.
Yeah.
Like you can tell in like the 70s, Bruce was really trying to prove himself as like up there with, with Brian and Mike and Paul McCartney and those types of songwriters. And by this point, he had kind of proven himself already and was kind of like Ringo or George, just happy to get his one or two songs on the album.
Yeah.
But I think Bruce's biggest stroke of genius that God knows how much it helped the band during this period was bringing Terry Melcher into the fold. Terry Melcher had visited during Pet Sounds sessions. He played a little, tambourine on this song or maybe a little piano on this song, but for the most part was just mostly a friend to the Beach Boys, but not a major contributor until you get to Beach Boys 85 and the singles around this time period when sort of similar how I said that Bruce wanted to give Gary Usher some work with Going Public. It was sort of a similar thing with Bruce bringing Terry into the fold with the Beach Boys. because it was kind of like this period was just when Terry Melcher was kind of getting over everything that happened with the Manson family.
Mm-hmm.
He was like so scarred from that. He did little projects here and there, but like for the most part, sort of had a lot of personal hell to deal with after that. And it was really like the mid 80s, early 80s when he was sort of feeling like himself again. And Bruce, Terry was one of Bruce's best friends. So Bruce really wanted to get Terry involved in the industry. And so that obviously led to some of the biggest songs of the band's whole career. And Bruce was involved in like every step of the Kokomo process, which sounds like a ludicrous thing that I just said. Um, but like he and Mike like were negotiating with Disney to get like the song in the movie, and Bruce was a part of that. And then they didn't even really know what they were going to sing at that point. And so they had, Kokomo was written by a lot of different people, Mike and Terry Melcher and John Phillips. And Bruce was kind of the one that got all those guys together and said, like, let's do something. And really, from what I've heard Bruce say, is that Bruce more or less was a co-writer and co-producer on Kokomo. But he just really he didn't need the accolades at this point. He already had his Grammy. He already had probably all the money he could have needed. And he was way happier to see his friends, Mike and Terry Melcher, get like their accolades and their flowers, to put it in a modern lingo. So yeah, Bruce just said like, hey, like you don't need to credit me as a co-writer. I don't need to be credited as a producer. It was kind of like in a way like a Bruce and Terry production, but Bruce just wanted Terry to get the credit because he knew that Terry really needed that. So just a wonderful example of Bruce being a team player, like I keep saying.
Yeah. I feel like we should mention also one of the most beloved songs from this period, Somewhere Near Japan, is a Bruce Johnston co-write. Contributes, I think, some great vocals to this as well.
I love Somewhere Near Japan. It's probably my favorite song on Still Cruising. Something about that song I just love. I think it's Al's vocal really is like amazing.
Yeah, to me, that song has a lot of like how we mentioned Bruce and Terry, their work together as the act Bruce and Terry was like very experimental, kind of genre cross pollination, and I think Somewhere Near Japan sort of is a return to form with those two guys making really creative pop music where it's very accessible, very catchy, but musically rich.
All right, so one last thing I wanted to mention about Summer in Paradise. One of the most funny moments in the Beach Boys catalog for me
I saw this on your notes.
is Bruce's vocal part on Summer of Love. The girls are always ready. That always makes me laugh every time I hear it. Honestly, like just makes that song, that ridiculously stupid song, enjoyable for me. So yeah, that always makes me laugh, that the vocal effect on that. So just wanted to mention
Bruce being the ultimate wingman for his man Mike. So during Summer in Paradise, if I'm not mistaken, this is when Carl started to have some health problems. I don't know if it was an official diagnosis yet, but I think they knew the writing was sort of on the wall, that he was beginning to decline a little bit. And also Al was in a way kind of fired from the band, at least in terms of the studio. I forget what's the word they used. Not disqualified.
dismissed.
Dismissed. Yeah, dismissed. Where it's like, what the hell does that mean? But nonetheless, I'd say Summer in Paradise vocally sounds like very authentically Beach Boys still, even though it was sort of like the skeleton crew of the Beach Boys. And a lot of it is Bruce and Terry and Mike doing the harmonies. But nonetheless, they did the harmonies very well, and it still sounds very authentically Beach Boys.
So in 2012, the Beach Boys put out That's Why God Made the Radio, which was their final album, released around the time of their 50th anniversary. Nate, I was doing a little bit of reading on this. I couldn't really find like any particular things mentioning Bruce, but I know that he was involved with this album and doing vocals. Do you want to talk a little bit about what his contributions were to That's Why God Made the Radio?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and we may have touched upon this in the Mike episode. I can't remember. And not to get too into the political side of the band, but when the conversations for That's Why God Made the Radio started, Joe Thomas, Brian, and Mike had dinner, and Joe Thomas and Brian, explained to Mike that Capitol was interested in a reunion album. They were fully on board. They were going to do the tour and the Grammy special or Grammy appearance and the two documentaries. One would be Talking Heads kind of documentary and then a live concert movie. They had all these grand plans for the reunion, and they promised Mike that each member would get to write on the album, that Bruce would get to write, and that Mike would get to write, and it would be very democratic and very much a group effort. And once Mike agreed to all of that, it was kind of a bit of like a bait and switch. And I don't necessarily want to comment on if that was intentional or not, because I have no idea. But once Mike agreed to that concept of it being very group oriented, very democratic, the sessions commenced, and it was almost like a Brian Wilson solo record. All the songs were prepared by Brian and Joe Thomas without really any Beach Boy involvement. Jeff Foskett laid all the scratch vocals down, and then they brought the Beach Boys in over a 2 or 3 week period to replace all the scratch vocals with their vocals. And it was done kind of very rushed, very thrown together, each guy coming in doing their parts. So I do know that, like Riley mentioned, like Bruce was kind of ready to bring in his song. He recorded this version of She Believes in Love Again. And Mike and Bruce were really excited about being like actively part of the Beach Boys studio creativity again, only to find that in a way they were kind of being excluded from the creativity. And, Mike did manage to get one song on the album with Daybreak Over the Ocean, and, they didn't include a Bruce song or a Al song. So I know that those guys all felt a little bit slighted, and that's like a little bit of why there's been some tension surrounding that album. But nonetheless, the songs on which Bruce does contribute, I think he really adds a lot vocally. What jumps out to me, 2 songs particularly, Think About the Days, I think is what it's called, the first song on the album. That's sort of almost like an Our Prayer sequel. Bruce does a lot of the falsettos on there. There's like 2 distinct falsetto parts, so it's Foskett and Bruce doing sort of different things. And man, it really gives me the chills to hear Bruce's falsetto so intact. And also Isn't It Time, classic Bruce lead on the chorus. His voice just still has that really sharp, cuts through the mix, sounds very youthful. So yeah, I do think that Bruce's vocal contributions really elevate the album, make it sound a lot more like the Beach Boys. But I do know that he wasn't really thrilled about, just being a backing vocalist when he was promised more of a central role.
All right, so before we wrap up this episode, I do want to mention one last Bruce collaboration outside of the Beach Boys. A very interesting one that I learned quite a bit more about today from talking to Nate. So Bruce collaborated with The Weeknd, of all people, in 2022 on a track called Here We Go Again, where Bruce contributed some vocals, some keyboard, and also produced the track. And from what Nate told me, also played a pretty decent part in the songwriting process as well. So Nate, do you want to talk a little bit about this track from The Weeknd and Bruce's contribution?
Yeah, so from what I understand, Bruce has become really friendly with this whole clique of producers in LA. And notably, that includes Skrillex. And, Bruce sort of took on like a mentorship role with Skrillex and has been doing some stuff in the studio with him. And Skrillex, like I said, he's a part of this clique of producers in LA. And one of those producers named is Rex Kudo. And at some point, they were doing some sessions for The Weeknd, and Rex invited Bruce to the studio. And from here, what I know about the story is from Christian's perspective. So he had Mike's son and longtime Beach Boys member Christian Love drive him to Rex Kudo's studio. And I think it was more about him wanting Christian's involvement and talents on the song, aside from the ride. So they go to Rex Kudo's studio, and they, were just so excited to see a Beach Boy or, 2 Beach Boys at work. And they just wanted to see Bruce and Christian do their thing. So, Bruce plays that extremely Bruce Johnston-y electric piano keyboard part. And to me, it just totally sounds like Endless Harmony Part 2. Like same sort of keyboard tones, similar voicings, all that. Like to me, it's just so clearly Bruce from the first second it starts. And they were particularly excited to have the Beach Boy harmonies. So Bruce laid the piano down, and then they just gave Bruce and Christian each handheld microphones, like you could imagine, kind of like this.
Yeah.
And they just start harmonizing and layering piece by piece, layer by layer, these harmonies on the piano until it's this great big Beach Boys sounding almost choir of voices. And so that was, for the most part, all Bruce and Christian. And you can imagine at that point, it's just these piano chords and these oohs and ahs. So then they had The Weeknd and Tyler, the Creator, and these different celebrities now like add their verses and their vocals. So a super collaborative song, but at its core, it's just so Bruce and so Beach Boysy.
Yeah.
It's just so cool to hear those two worlds collide.
Yeah. That's what jumped out at me the most listening to it today, because I knew about this song. I knew that there was a song that Bruce had done with The Weeknd. I maybe had heard it once before, but I don't know how much I was like actually paying attention to it when I was listening to it. But today I sat down and listened to the full thing just with my headphones on. And yeah, the thing that jumped out at me the most was like, wow, like this is so Bruce. Like I can totally see how Bruce was involved in this. Like it totally feels like something that Bruce would have written, Bruce would have produced. Like you said, like that keyboard part is very Bruce. And I actually really enjoy the song a lot. I'm not like I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest fan of The Weeknd. I like a couple of his songs that I know, but I'm not someone that like would sit down and just listen to a full album of his. But that said, I did enjoy this track quite a bit, and I probably will end up coming back to it. And yeah, I think it's just really cool that like in the year 2022, a Beach Boy is collaborating with like one of the biggest artists on the planet right now. So just a really neat collaboration there. So Matt, do you have thoughts on this track?
Yeah, I really liked it too. I've seen The Weeknd in concert. He puts on an incredible show. He's a very talented guy. And I also think it's really awesome that, Bruce collaborated with him, like pretty incredible. You said when you like, a Beach Boy in the, in the 2020s collaborating with one of the biggest stars in the world. I really enjoy the song a lot. And I have seen him live too, and I will say he does put on an amazing show.
Yeah.
You any of our listeners have not seen him.
Yeah, and it's really cool, Nate, to hear about like you said, like the respect that they had for like Bruce coming into the studio and working with them, and just like kind of wanting to watch him do his thing. Like that shows you that like they don't view him as some like old dinosaur producer. They view him as like a guy that like still to this day knows what he's doing, and is just a very respected performer and producer. So I think that that's really cool to hear that.
Yeah, I do wonder, like, going forward, what more, if more Bruce will release or contribute to. And I think he does have some more left in the tank. I heard, that he's still involved in the studio, but hypothetically, if that was his last song, I think what a hell of a way to go out. It makes sense. Like, you have a guy who starts with Jane and Dean and Sandy Nelson and Phil Spector as like a real studio guy, doing the arrangements and the keyboards and harmonies, sort of in the background, but yet very prolifically. And yet, all these years later, starting in the 50s and now in the 2020s, him still having a similar role where he's not the star of the show, but he's singing his ass off and playing the piano. It's just so full circle, and so just kind of like puts you in perspective, like, wow, like what an amazing career,
right?
What an amazing musical talent.
And it's funny because I imagine that song for a lot of people, when they think of it, they probably think like Weeknd fans, they think, oh, that's the song with Tyler, the Creator on it. Where like we think like that's the song. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it though. Like, Bruce has always kind of like been behind the scenes in the background, working on these songs. And yeah, the fact that he started out his career doing that and, possibly close his career doing that, is really cool. And like you said, like it's cool that he worked with an artist like The Weeknd, and really kind of reflects on like the wide cast of different musicians and artists that Bruce has worked with over the years. So yeah, if that is it for him in terms of production, I think, like you said, it's a really fitting way to close his production career. So
I would just add too, because my wife demanded that I say this in the Bruce episode. She has been a performer her whole life. She's like, I would describe my wife Sophie as like a performance purist.
mhm.
She loves musical theater, and she's studied the great actors and the great performers of our time and of all time. And it's her opinion. She says that Bruce is the greatest performer his age that she has ever seen. And we've been to a lot of cool concerts together. Um, but Bruce is just so engaged on stage.
Yeah,
Is he doing a lot of clapping or a lot of what some people call cheerleading? For sure. But he is so present and so engaged from from the second the concert starts to the second it's finished. He is completely present. And you guys know I love Mike Love to death. I think he's a brilliant performer, an amazing talent. But I will say, like, even Mike, Sophie puts it funny, like he's a little bit of an animatronic of himself at this point on
yeah,
stage. But Bruce is just still so lively. Dude will be jumping around, he'll be running across the stage, he'll be dancing, and like Jake said, he still sings some of the highest parts in the stack.
mhm.
Like if the Brian falsetto part is top, Bruce is normally right below that. And he still plays his little organ solo on Wild Honey and keyboards on Good Vibrations. And so it's just he adds so much to the shows, and he's really just a real treat to watch on stage because you can tell he's having the time of his life.
Right. Yeah, he brings like that youthful energy that the Beach Boys have always really been known for. And yeah, I have a video on my phone from when I saw the Beach Boys a couple years ago in Chicago of Bruce like jumping over the microphone cord. And it's just a really funny
Yeah.
watching this 80-year-old guy like just jump into the air. Like it's just really funny. So yeah, it's awesome to see him still out there, clearly having a fun time. And hopefully the current touring band goes on for years to come. So
Yeah, like I think someone like Mike or even someone, like different people, different frontmen, or they might enjoy the audience reaction and the money they make and the cities they get to visit. But when I watch Bruce, I feel like you can tell that he just is in love with music and making music.
yeah. Yeah.
And that just is apparent every time he's in the studio, every time he's on stage, every time he gives an interview. You can just tell that like music is like the blood that courses through his veins.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this 39th episode of Good Timin. Hope you all enjoyed the show. I had a great time talking about Bruce's lengthy career in music, and I'm looking forward to doing even more of these member spotlight episodes in the near future. So as always, if you like this podcast and want to hear more, feel free to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. We greatly appreciate the support as it motivates us to make more episodes in the future. Also, as a reminder, the Good Timin podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So there's plenty of different places to listen and keep up with the show. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.